The cup in my wife's hand is the one she poured for me, and I am the man who moved it there. 240 people are standing in the Hollis Winter Garden with their glasses up, and the quartet has stopped playing. My wife of 1 hour looks at me over the rim and smiles the way she smiles at photographers. Then she drinks it, all of it. She sets the empty glass down on the cloth, licks the sweetness off her lip, and says, softly, "So only the front table's here. You look pale, darling." I am pale, because 5 months from tonight, I die in a bed on the 3rd floor of this house. She is holding my hand when it happens. She is crying, and the crying is real, because she is very good at this. My name is Nathan Reyes, and I am 27 years old. 6 hours ago, I signed a marriage license in a room full of white flowers. Tonight, I drank water while my wife drank the first dose of the thing that killed me. Let me say what was in that glass, because it matters, and because it took me the whole of my dying to learn it. It is called the Amber Course. 7 doses, 1 a week for 7 weeks, and each dose alone does nothing at all except a headache and a bad night. Taken through to the end, it stops a heart and leaves a body that any coroner in this city reads as a young man with a bad valve. The 7th cup went into my nightly cocoa in the middle of December, and my heart took until the spring to finish giving out. I remember the ceiling of that room, and I remember the sound my father made in the hallway. So, tonight, when Celeste put the amber glass in my hand and turned to greet her uncle, I turned the tray. The cups are the reason I could. They came out of my father's shop, a matched pair he blew by hand as a wedding gift. Amber glass with a fat twist in the stem. They are twins to every eye in this room except mine, because I was standing at the bench when he made them. The left one has a bubble in the stem the size of a pinhead. He swore at that bubble for an hour, and my sister told him it was a good luck fault, and he should leave it in. He left it in. It is the cheapest object in this room, and it is the only object in this room I cannot lose track of. So when she looked away, I put my thumb over the bubble and set the good glass in her hand, and she is smiling at her father now, with no idea in the world. She thinks the amber in her mouth was honey wine, and the sweetness at the back of it was the honey. It was not the honey. Julian Roth raises his glass from the second table. He runs the Hollis Compound Lab. He is 34, he has a jaw like a coin, and he is the man who built the Amber Course inside a building this family paid for. To the bride, he says, and the room says it back to him, and while the room is saying it, he looks at my wife for 1 second longer than a man should. Her chin comes up half an inch. That is the whole of it, half an inch. Nobody in this garden sees it. I have seen it 400 times, and once from a hospital bed across a room, on an afternoon when I could not lift my own arm off the blanket. My father is at table 9, with his hands folded in his lap. He is 61, his knuckles are ruined from 40 years at a furnace, and he keeps checking his cuffs because Ren told him the cuffs were the important part. Ren is beside him in a green dress she picked out herself. She is 16, and she is looking at the ice sculpture with open contempt. That swan cost more than our roof, she says, and she does not say it quietly. It cost more than 4 of our roofs, I tell her, and I tell her to eat something. She takes a fig off a passing tray and eats it in a way clearly designed to insult a swan. My father tells her to sit like a person, and she sits like a person for about 9 seconds. Grandmother Iris Hollis comes through the crowd with a cane she does not need, and the crowd opens for her the way water opens for a boat. She is 81. She founded the hospital arm. Everyone in this family is frightened of her, and that includes me. She looks me over from shoes to collar and says, "Glassmaker's son." "Yes, ma'am. Good hands," she says. "This family has too many soft ones." Then she taps her cane twice on the marble and says, "And you will give blood in January like everybody else. No excuses, no doctor's notes." Marianne Hollis laughs into her drink. Celeste's mother has laughed at that joke for 40 years. The founders panel is this family's little embarrassment, the thing the cousins groan about every Christmas. Here is what it is. No Hollis sits at that board table without giving blood in front of witnesses. Drawn in the room, read out at the table, every seat, every year. Iris put the rule in the charter after her husband died. Everyone at this party thinks she is a paranoid old woman about it, and everyone at this party is very polite about her paranoia. I look at her and think, "Ma'am, you have no idea how right you were." And then I have to look at the floor for a moment, so my face does not say it out loud. A macaw screams from the orangery. That is Bishop. He is 40 years old, scarlet and blue, and he belonged to Iris's husband. Bishop repeats things, and not right away. He chews on a sentence for days and then shouts it in the middle of a lunch. The whole house has learned to speak carefully in the East Wing because of him. Last winter, he spent a week screaming a phrase Marianne had said to her accountant, and Marianne changed accountants. In the life I already lived, nobody ever thought about that bird as anything but a nuisance. I am thinking about him now. The cake comes out. Celeste's hand goes up to her temple, quickly, and comes down again. She thinks it is champagne. Her thumb presses the spot above her left eye for about 2 seconds, and then she lets it go. That is the amber. Dose 1, hour 1. The headache behind the left eye. I know the exact place because I lived with that place for 7 weeks. Are you all right? I ask her, and she says, I am wonderful, and takes my arm for the photographs. Her fingers on my sleeve are warm and light and perfectly placed. For the photographs, I smile like a lucky man who cannot believe his luck, and that is the face I intend to wear for a while. It costs me nothing, and it buys me everything. The photographer wants us by the fountain. Julian stands in the 3rd row of that photograph, behind her left shoulder, and he puts his hand on the back of her chair when he thinks the shutter has stopped. It has not stopped. I know it has not stopped, because in the life I already lived, that photographer sent over a contact sheet in January, and the 14th frame was pulled from the album by Marianne herself, and nobody ever explained why. I do nothing about it tonight. That is the thing nobody tells you about coming back. The temptation is to swing at everything on the first day, at every face, at every hand, on every chair. I have one weapon, and it is a map of 5 months, and every time I change something, the map goes crooked in that place forever. Spend it badly, and I am only a man in a house full of people who want him dead. So tonight, I spend nothing. Tonight I smile and swap a cup. At 11:30, the guests thin out and Beautran takes coats at the north door. He is the night porter. He is 50, and he has a bad shoulder from carrying a grown man down 3 flights of stairs in the spring. That man was me. He was dismissed 2 weeks after he did it because he used the family elevator without permission. I heard about it at the very end, when I could not lift my head off a pillow to make one telephone call for him. "Good night, Mr. Reyes," he says, and hands me my father's coat before my father asks for it. "What time do you finish?" I ask him. "4, sir." "Do not take the river road home this year," I say. He looks at me the way a man looks at a groom who has had too much champagne, and he says, "Yes, sir," kindly, and I let him think it. It is the first change I make, and it does not cost me a single page. My father hugs me at the car and smells like the shop, which no soap has ever fixed. "Your mother would have liked the flowers," he says. "She would have hated the flowers, Dad. She would have hated the flowers," he agrees, and holds on a second longer than he means to. Ren gets in and puts the window down. "If she is horrible to you, call me, and I will come and be horrible back. Go to bed," I tell her. "You have a chemistry test." "I have a chemistry test in 3 weeks. "You have one on Thursday," I say, and she stares at me all the way down the drive. I remember the day she came home and cried about that test. I remember most of the days. That is the whole of my inheritance, and it is worth more than this house. The room they gave us is on the 3rd floor. It is the room I died in. There is an orchid on the window table, white, in a blue pot, and I look at it for a long moment, because in 5 months, that orchid will still be alive, and I will not. Celeste comes out of the bathroom in a silk robe with her hair down. She is 30. She is genuinely beautiful, which I say plainly because pretending otherwise would make me a liar, and I am trying to be careful about which lies I spend. She has a cup in her hand. "Cocoa," she says, "my grandmother's thing. Everyone in this house drinks it on the first night. It is a whole ridiculous tradition. It is not a tradition. Nobody in this house has ever drunk it but me. Every night, for 7 weeks, out of her hand." "Thank you," I say, and I take it and sit on the end of the bed with it warm in both palms. She goes to the mirror and starts pulling pins out of her hair. There are 15 pins. She drops them one by one into a dish, and they ring like small bells. "Long day," she says. "Very long. You were sweet with my grandmother. I like her. Everyone likes her," she says. "She is the only person alive who frightens my mother." Then she laughs at her own reflection, and it is a nice laugh, and I sit there holding poison and thinking about how pleasant a person can be while doing arithmetic on your funeral. She goes into the bathroom and shuts the door. I stand up, cross to the window table, and pour the cocoa into the blue pot around the orchid. Then I fill the cup at the tap and put half of it away in 3 swallows. When she comes out, I am holding a nearly empty cup and looking sleepy. Good boy, she says. 6 left, I am thinking. 7 for me in the life I already lived. 6 for her now, because the first one is already inside her, and there is nothing on earth she can do about it. That is the shape of the whole thing. Now the thing that gives me a clock. In the life I already lived, in the 4th week, Julian came up to that room while she was out. He stood at the window and told me I looked tired, and asked whether I had seen any doctor except Emmett Shaw. I said no, and he was pleased. Then he said, half to himself, the way a proud man says a thing he has been aching to say to somebody, that 40 days is a long time to keep a man off a lab bench. I did not understand it then. I understood it at the end, when a woman in black sat down beside my bed and asked me one question that I could not answer. The amber leaves a mark. It is not a poison anybody tests for, because nobody tests for a thing they have never heard of. It binds to something in the liverwork and throws a band on an ordinary blood panel, a narrow stripe sitting where no stripe belongs. That band is readable for 40 days from the first dose. After 40 days, it fades out and the blood is just blood again. Celeste Hollis drank her first dose at 9 minutes past 10 this evening. So I have 40 days to put that woman in front of a needle she cannot refuse, in a room she does not control, with people watching who have not been paid to look the other way. 40 days. That is my entire life now. She turns the lamp off. In the dark, she says my name. Yes. I know why you married me, she says. My whole body goes cold and still, and for 1 second I am certain she saw the tray, the swap, my thumb over the bubble in the stem. Her father's lease, she says. The shop. It is fine, Nathan. Everybody marries for something, and I honestly do not mind at all. I let the breath out very slowly and say, that is not the only reason. She likes that. I can hear her liking it in the dark, which is the strangest sound I have ever listened to. Then she is asleep in about 4 minutes, the way people sleep when nothing in their life is a problem. I lie there with my eyes open and I make my list. The first thing on it is not revenge. The first thing on it is a woman in black who came to my deathbed with a card in her hand and asked me what I drank at night. I never got to answer her. Her name was Rosalind Kane. In the morning, the house is full of caterers taking a wedding down. I go to the kitchen at 7 and eat toast among 9 people who do not speak to me, which suits me. Celeste is on the terrace with her phone, black coffee, and sunglasses on at 7 in the morning in November. Head, she says, when I bring her the aspirin she has not asked for. Champagne. I am never drinking again. Sure you are. Ice, passions. I am never drinking that much again, she corrects, and looks at me over the top of the glasses for a second, and I can watch her deciding that I am attentive and slightly dull and exactly what she ordered. Julian arrives at 8 with paperwork he did not need to bring on a Sunday. He shakes my hand and calls me Nate, which nobody calls me. Big day yesterday, he says. How does it feel? Unreal, I say, and that one is entirely honest. He goes out to the terrace. Through the glass, I watch him stand a foot too close and say something, and I watch her not step back. Then he says something else, and she does step back, sharply, and looks at the house. I am already turned away pouring coffee like a man who sees nothing. I know what she said, because I have heard her say it before, in a corridor, in the spring. She said, not here. In the life I already lived, this is the week the two of them get careless. On Sunday afternoon, a caterer's girl finds a pearl earring in the linen closet off the east corridor and gives it to the housekeeper, and the housekeeper gives it to Celeste, and Celeste tips her $40, and that is the end of it forever. The earring is Celeste's. It did not get into that closet by falling. I look at the clock and it is 10 past 8, and the linen count happens at 2, and I have about 6 hours to decide whether I burn a page of my map on a pearl earring. I decide against it. An earring buys me an affair, and an affair buys me a divorce, a settlement, and a phone call in March telling me my father's shop has been sold out from under him while he was in a hospital corridor. I do not want a divorce. I want the backlog of the Amber course. I want Emmett Shaw's signature on the wrong certificate. And I want that band printed on a piece of paper with Celeste Hollis's name at the top of it. So I let the earring go. I let the girl find it, and I let the $40 happen, and I go upstairs and put a coat on. Where are you going? Celeste calls from the terrace. To see my sister, I say. She has a chemistry test. That is true. It is also 9 miles in the wrong direction from where I am actually going. Kane Diagnostics runs the laboratories that read half the blood in this city. Hollis owns hospitals. Kane owns the machines that tell hospitals what is inside people, which is a much better business and a much quieter one. 3 years ago, Rosalind Kane's younger brother died at 26 of a heart that simply stopped, and the family put out a statement about an undiagnosed condition, and everybody went to the funeral and said what a shame it was. I know 2 things about that funeral that Rosalind Kane does not know I know. She has never once accepted the phrase undiagnosed condition, and she came into my room in the spring with a card in her hand while I was too far gone to speak. Kane Building is glass. It is Sunday. I have no appointment, and I look like a man who slept badly, which I did. I tell the desk that my name is Nathan Reyes, that I married Celeste Hollis yesterday, and that I would like 9 minutes of Miss Kane's time. The woman at the desk looks at me with real sympathy, the way you look at a lost tourist. Miss Kane is not in on Sundays, she says. Miss Kane is on the 4th floor because the audit closes tomorrow, I say. Please tell her I want to talk about the band on her brother's panel. She stops typing. I do not know whether that gets me upstairs or gets me removed by security, and if it is security, then I have burned a page and bought nothing at all with it. 20 minutes later, a woman comes down alone. Rosalind Kane is 31. She is in a gray sweater and jeans, which is not the woman from the funeral photographs, and her hair is up with a pen through it, and her eyes go over me like a scanner reading a barcode. Say that again, she says, the thing you said to my receptionist. The band on your brother's panel, I say. The extra stripe. Nobody ever explained it, and you kept the paper. Who told you that? Nobody told me. Can we sit down? She does not sit down. She stands in the middle of her own lobby with her arms crossed and says, You married Celeste Hollis yesterday. I saw it on the news at breakfast. So why are you in my building? Because your brother and I were given the same thing, I say. There is a pause about 4 seconds long, and it is the loudest 4 seconds of my life. Then she says, Come upstairs, and turns and walks, and I follow her past a security desk where a man half stands, and she does not even look at him, and he sits back down. Her office has 1 chair for visitors, and there is a coat on it. She moves the coat and then sits on the edge of her desk instead, which puts her above me, and I am certain that is not an accident. Talk, she says. I have thought about this for an entire night. Here is the trap. If I say I came back from the dead, I am a lunatic. If I say I have proof, she asks to see the proof, and I have none of any kind. So I do the 3rd thing. I am so going to tell you how I know, I say. You would not believe it, and we would waste the 9 minutes. I am going to tell you 3 things you can check by Tuesday, and if all 3 are true, then you can decide for yourself what I am. Her mouth moves very slightly. Go on. 1. The band on your brother's panel sits between 2 normal marks. It is narrow, and everyone in your building called it a laboratory artifact. Your own people could not repeat it because the sample was gone. 2. In his last 2 months, he was under a Hollis physician called Emmett Shaw and not under his own doctor. 3. Your brother told somebody he was getting headaches behind the left eye on the same day of the week for about 7 weeks. She has gone extremely still, and it is not the stillness of a woman listening to nonsense. Wednesdays, she says. I do not know which day, I tell her. I know it was 1 day, every week, and it got worse each time. She gets off the desk and walks to the window and stands with her back to me long enough that I count the cars in the lot below. Then she says, without turning round, My brother's name was Peter. I know. Say the rest of it. There is a compound, I say. It is not on any list anywhere, because it was made in a Hollis building by a Hollis employee, and it has never once been outside. 7 doses, 1 a week. The heart goes at the 7th, and the paperwork reads clean. And you know that how? Because I have had 6 of them, I say. That is only the wrong tense, and I have decided I am allowed exactly this many wrong tenses and no more. She turns round. Now she is looking at me properly, at the color of my face and the way I am sitting, and I watch a doctor's daughter add it all up. You are being poisoned right now, she says, in that house. Since when? Since last night. You got married last night. Yes. Rosalind Kane says a word I would not repeat in front of my sister, and then picks up her phone and cancels something. Here is where a stupider man asks for money, or for protection, or for a lawyer. I know exactly what to ask for, because I have thought about nothing else since 3 in the morning, and because money is the one thing here that has never helped anybody at any point. I do not want your money, I say. I want a copy of Peter's panel, the original scan with the band on it, and I want one number from you. Which number? How long that band stays readable in blood. She stops with her thumb over the screen. Why? Because I did not drink last night, I say. She did. Rosalind Kane looks at me for a long moment, and then she laughs, one short surprise sound she clearly did not plan on making, and puts a hand over her mouth like a woman caught doing something. You swapped the cups, she says. They were my father's cups, I say, and one of them has a bubble in the stem. At your own wedding. At my own wedding in front of 240 people. She sits down in the visitor chair she cleared for me and does not appear to notice that she has done it. Then the amusement drains out of her face, and something a great deal harder comes up underneath it. 40 days, she says. I know. No, you do not know, she says. And now she is talking fast. The way people talk when a thing they have carried alone for 3 years suddenly has somebody else in the room to help carry it. We ran that artifact on stored plasma for a year. It fades. 6 weeks out there is nothing there, she says. 5 weeks out, it is a whisper. At 40 days, it is still a stripe you could put in front of a judge. So I have 40 days. You have 39, she says. You have already spent 1. That is the first moment I like her. Then she says, the thing I have no plan for. She will not go near a laboratory, Rosalind says. Not a Kane laboratory, not a hospital. That family reads its own blood in its own building. If I call for a draw, she will laugh at me, and then Julian Roth will know somebody is looking. I know a room she cannot refuse, I say. Where? Her own board table, I say. And there I stop, because the rest of it is January, and January is 9 weeks away, and 39 days from tonight is the middle of December. Rosalind Kane sees the gap before I have finished the sentence. She is quick in a way that is going to be a serious problem for a number of people. The Founders Panel is in January, she says. Everyone in this city knows about the Hollis Blood Circus. That is too late. Yes, so you need to move the circus. Or give somebody a reason to call an early seat, I say. She stares at me. You have been out of that house for 1 morning. I have had a lot of time to think, I say, and she lets that go, which I appreciate more than I can tell her. She picks up her phone and takes a photograph of my face, which I am not expecting. When I look at her, she says, if you die in that house, I want a picture of you from before, so that nobody can tell me you always looked like that. That is a horrible thing to say, I tell her. Yes, she says. I have a horrible job. She sends me a copy of Peter Kane's panel before I reach the elevator. I stand in the lobby of a glass building and look at a narrow stripe on a scan of a piece of paper and think, quite calmly, there you are. Then I go and buy my sister a chemistry textbook because I told my wife I was going to see my sister, and because if I am going to be a liar for the next 5 weeks, I would rather be an efficient one. Ren opens the door of the shop flat with a pencil in her mouth. You are married, she says. Why are you here? I brought you this. She takes the book, looks at the cover, and says, this is next year's. Read ahead. Is she awful? She is very pleasant, I say. Ren takes the pencil out of her mouth. That is a horrible answer, she says. That is the answer you give when somebody is awful. Then she goes back inside to argue with a textbook, and I stand on the landing for a second and love her so much it is difficult to breathe properly. Downstairs, my father has the furnace lit on a Sunday, which he is not supposed to do, and the shop smells of hot sand and burnt gas and my entire childhood. He is making cups. Of course he is making cups. 6 orders, Nathan, he says. 6. From people with names. Your wife's aunt wants 12. 12, and he is standing there at 61 with his ruined hands, looking happier than I have seen him look in about 9 years. I stand in the doorway of my father's shop and look at the lease on the wall in its cheap frame. The building belongs to Hollis Property. The lease has 3 years to run and a clause on the 3rd page letting the landlord end it in 90 days for cause. In the life I already lived, they used that clause in March. My father was standing in a hospital corridor when they told him. He came into my room afterwards and did not mention it. And I found out from Ren later, after I could no longer get up. Dad, I say, do not take any deposits. He looks up. Why not? Take the orders and do the work and take the money at delivery. No deposits, no matter who asks, and especially not if the name is Hollis. He wipes his hands on the cloth and looks at me the way he has looked at me twice before in my life, both times in hospitals. Is something wrong, son? Yes, I say, because he would know if I lied to him. It is going to be fine, and I am going to handle it. Do not take deposits and do not sign anything with that family, I tell him. Not even a birthday card. He nods slowly. My father has been poor in every way it is possible for a man to be poor, and he knows the sound of a warning when he hears one. Then he says, "Does she make you happy?" And I say, "She is going to make me very rich, Dad." And he laughs, because he thinks I am joking, and I go and stand near the furnace where the heat makes your eyes water for a perfectly good reason. Get back to the house at 4. Celeste is in the east drawing room with her mother and 2 women from a charity board. And when I come in, she puts her hand out without looking, and I take it and stand beside her chair like a nice piece of furniture. "This is Nathan," she says. "He is in glass." One of the women asks whether I do windows. Marianne Hollis says, "Church windows, darling," and everybody laughs. And I laugh too. And think about how enormously I am going to enjoy the middle of December. When they leave, Arwen Amikishan Wanya Beta Marianne stays. She is 56, she wears her hair like a helmet, and in 4 days of marriage, she's not once said my name. Simon called, she tells Celeste. He is bringing the pediatric wing numbers to the Thursday meeting himself. Celeste's face does something. Of course he is. He is positioning. He is always positioning, mother, Celeste says. He is 33 years old and he has been positioning since he was 9. Simon Hollis is her cousin and he runs the 2 smaller hospitals. In the life I already lived, he lost the seat to Celeste in March, sold his shares a fortnight later and moved to another city, and I never spoke 10 words to the man in my life. I put him on the shelf in my head with everything else. That shelf is getting crowded. The headache comes back at 6. I am reading in the window seat when Celeste puts 2 fingers above her left eye and holds them there. Then she says, "That is odd." "What is?" "I have had this since last night," she says. "Same spot. It comes and it goes." "Champagne," I say. "I have never had a hangover for 2 days in my life," she says. She says it lightly, but she puts her phone face down on the arm of the chair, and my wife does not put her phone down for anything. "Do you want me to call somebody?" I say. "Dr. Shaw." "No," she says, quite quickly. "It is nothing. There it is." Even now, with 1 dose in her and no idea on earth what she is carrying, some part of her says, "Do not put this in front of a physician. That is habit." She has spent 6 weeks planning a poisoning, and her whole body has learned to walk around doctors the way you walk around a wet floor. I make a note of that as well, because it is going to matter more than anything else I learned this week. At dinner, there are 5 of us: Celeste, Marianne, Iris at the head of the table, Julian, and me. Julian eats in this house twice a week, and nobody finds it strange, because he has eaten here twice a week since he was a graduate student they were kind to. Iris asks me about the furnace. She asks proper questions, temperatures and annealing, and how long a piece has to cool before you can touch it, and she listens to the answers. Marianne looks like a woman being forced to watch a documentary about drainage. Then Iris says, "Julian, when did you last give blood for the panel?" "January," Julian says pleasantly. "Same as everybody. You are not a Hollis. I am on the compound committee," he says. "It is in my contract." "Your rule, ma'am." "My rule." Iris agrees, and she looks at him for a beat longer than the sentence needs, and then goes back to her fish. I keep my eyes on my plate. Under the table, my hands are not quite steady, because grandmother Iris Hollis has just told me, without any idea that she has told me, that the man who built the Amber course sits down once a year and lets somebody put a needle in his arm. Which means Julian Roth has spent every January of his adult life making certain there is nothing in his blood to find. Which means Julian Roth knows to the day how long that band lasts. Which means Julian Roth is carrying a calendar in his head that reads 40 days, and there is a woman upstairs from him with a headache behind her left eye, and not one reason in the world for him to put those 2 things together. Bishop screams from the orangery, and everybody ignores him. He shouts, "Not here." Marianne says, "That awful bird," and rings for coffee. Celeste laughs and reaches for the sugar. Julian Roth's hand stops in the air for about a quarter of a second before it picks up his glass. I see it happen. I am fairly certain I am the only person at this table who sees it happen. 40 years old and still repeating everything, Iris says fondly. He heard something in the East Wing again. He does that, Celeste says. He always has, Iris says. My husband used to say Bishop was the only honest member of this family. And then dinner goes on and the coffee comes. And I sit there with a napkin in my lap and 39 days on my clock. And I think, with a calm that frightens me slightly, that I am going to take this entire house apart with my hands. Not tonight, though. Tonight, I am going to go upstairs and pour a cup of cocoa into an orchid. The orchid, as it happens, is doing extremely well. Monday morning, I get a message from a number I have not saved. It reads, "Panel readable at 40 days, confirmed in stored plasma. Do not lose your nerve. R." I write back, "I have never had any nerve. That is why I have a plan." 3 dots appear and vanish twice. Then, good answer, and nothing else for 4 days. Week 1. I do nothing at all. And it is the hardest thing I have ever done in either of my lives. I sit in that house and I am pleasant. I learn the names of the staff, which nobody in this family has done in a generation. The housekeeper is Nadia. The day girls are Femi and Charlotte. The cook is a man called Anselm, who ran a kitchen with a star in it until his knees went, and who has not been asked a single question about food in 15 years of working here. I ask him about food and he talks for 40 minutes. On Thursday, he starts putting an extra thing on my plate that nobody else gets, which is a small matter, and small matters are the only currency I have at the moment. Otran works Tuesday through Saturday, 10 at night until 4 in the morning. He has a daughter doing an accountancy qualification. He drives a gray car with a dent in the rear door, and he parks it behind the greenhouses because the staff lot floods. Every one of these people watched me die, and not one of them was ever asked a single question about it. On Wednesday, Celeste has the headache again, the same eye, and she does not mention it to me. I know because I watch her hand. On Wednesday night, she brings up the cocoa. Dose 2 goes into the orchid. I am beginning to be genuinely concerned about the orchid. On Thursday, I go to the board meeting because a husband is allowed in the gallery, and I sit at the back and watch 14 people argue about a pediatric wing for 2 hours. Simon Hollis presents, and he is good. He is genuinely good, and he is so obviously pleased with himself about it that every person in the room is quietly hunting for a reason to disagree with him. Celeste takes him apart in about 6 minutes. She does it with numbers, she does it politely, and by the end, Simon is defending a position he did not hold when he walked into the room. I watch my wife work, and I understand properly, for the first time, that she did not kill me because she is stupid or because she is cruel. She killed me because I was a line item, and she is extremely good at her job. Somehow, that is very much worse. Afterwards, Iris finds me in the corridor. "You sat through 2 hours of drainage costs," she says. "I like watching people who are good at things." She grunts. Then she says, "In January, you sit at that table too." "I do not think so, ma'am," I say. "I married in." "You married a seat boy," she says. "My rule says every seat, and it says it in the charter, and the charter does not care who your father was." She taps the cane. "Every seat, every year. That was the entire point of it." Then she walks off, and I stand in that corridor with my ears ringing, because grandmother Iris Hollis has just handed me a piece of the last scene of all this, and she thinks she was scolding me about paperwork. Every seat, not every Hollis, every seat. I go home and sit in the window and look at an orchid and start doing the only arithmetic that matters now. There are 11 seats at that table. In January, all 11 give blood, and the results are read aloud by the chair, and it is a joke, and everybody groans and rolls their sleeves down and goes to lunch. January is 9 weeks away. The band dies in 35 days, so I do not need January at all. I need a reason for that table to sit in December with needles on the trolley, and I need it to be somebody else's idea entirely. The charter is a public filing. I read all 41 pages of it that night on the floor of a bathroom with the door locked and the brightness on my phone turned down to nothing. Page 29, the section on vacancy. If a seat falls empty between annual meetings, the successor is confirmed at a special sitting, and the successor gives the founders panel at that sitting before the vote is recorded. I read it 4 times, then I sit on the tile with my back against the bath and laugh without making any sound until my eyes water. Iris Hollis wrote that clause 40 years ago in a fury, 3 months after they buried her husband, and every lawyer since has left it alone because arguing with her about it is not worth the afternoon. So here is what I need. I need a seat to fall empty within 5 weeks. I need Celeste Hollis to want that seat so badly that she takes it in December instead of waiting for March. And I need her to roll up her own sleeve in a room with 11 witnesses and a machine that does not care whose daughter she is. I go back to bed and lie down beside the woman who murdered me and look at the ceiling and think, 35 days, and then I sleep better than I have slept since I came back. Friday, she takes me to a hospital opening, which is the sort of event where a photographer walks backwards in front of you for an hour. Celeste is very good at it. She holds my hand at the right moments and lets go at the right moments. Halfway down the third corridor, a nurse says, "Mrs. Hollis," and Celeste keeps walking, and the nurse says it again, louder. The nurse is about 45. Her badge says Cobb. She has a folder pressed against her chest with both arms. "Miss Hollis," she says, "Ivy Cobb, I have sent 9 letters about the compound trial consents, and not one of them has been answered." Marianne's assistant steps in smoothly and begins steering. Celeste smiles and says, "Send them again," and moves on down the corridor. I stop, because I know that name. Ivy Cobb was dismissed in February for a data protection breach, which is the phrase this family uses when what it means is asked a question twice. "What compound trial?" I ask her. She looks at me and decides in about 1 second that I am nobody at all. Then she decides to talk anyway, which tells me how long she has been carrying this on her own. "The lab runs small tolerance studies through the outpatient clinic," she says. "Volunteers, paid. The consent forms come back with a batch reference on them, and half of those references do not match anything in the pharmacy log. Do you have copies?" "I have my own notes," she says carefully. I am not stupid. "Miss Cobb," I say, "do not send a 10th letter." She goes stiff. "Excuse me. Do not send a 10th letter. Do not put anything in writing to anybody in that building, and keep your notes somewhere that is not your desk and not your house. Who are you?" "I am married to her," I say. That is the most useful thing about me. Then I walk on and catch up with the photographers and put my hand on my wife's back and smile for a camera, and inside my chest something is going very fast indeed. Julian Roth has been running the Amber course on paid volunteers out of a clinic in the north of this city, which means that somewhere in that building there is a pharmacy log with a batch reference that does not match and a signature at the bottom of the page. Nasher Misto Saturday, I meet Rosalind Kane in an underground car park because she says her building is watched, and I say that is paranoid, and she says, yes it is. She has a coffee for me. It is the correct coffee. I do not remember ever telling her what coffee I drink, and I decide not to think too hard about that. 33 days, she says. I know. Tell me what you have. I tell her about page 29. She reads it on her phone and then says, "Oh, that is beautiful," in the tone most people keep for music. Then she says, "So who dies?" Nobody dies. A seat falls empty. There is a difference, is there? Simon Hollis, I say. He loses in March and resigns the week after and moves to Denver. He has the offer already. It is sitting in his email at this moment, and he's going to turn it down in a fortnight because he thinks he can win in March. And you know that how? I look at her and she looks back at me, and it is a completely fair question, and we both know I am not going to answer it. Fine, she says. Say he does not turn it down. Say he resigns in 3 weeks instead. Why does Celeste take his seat in December instead of waiting? Because Simon's seat carries the compound committee, I say. Rosalind's coffee stops moving halfway to her mouth. Julian sits on that committee, I say. He is the only person on it who understands the chemistry, and the seat that oversees him is the one nobody wants, because it is all reading and no glory. If it falls empty, whoever takes it can open every batch log in that building, without asking anybody's permission. So if you can make her want it, I do not have to make her want it, I say. I have to make her frightened of who else might take it. Rosalind Kane looks at me over a paper cup in an underground car park and says, "Mr. Reyes, you are a genuinely frightening man. I am a glassmaker's son with a headache," I say. "Yes," she says. "Those are the worst ones." Then she says, "Careful." "What?" "You are enjoying this," she says. I open my mouth to say something clever and nothing at all comes out because she is right. And because, until she said it out loud, I had not noticed. On the drive home, I think about that for 20 miles. Here is the truth of it. For 7 weeks in the life I already lived, I got smaller and smaller in a bed, while people I trusted made decisions about me in the next room. I could not lift a cup. At the end, I could not lift my own head off a pillow. And now I am the one holding the tray. I do not think that makes me a good man. I think it makes me even. But I take Rosalind Kane's warning upstairs with me and put it on the shelf with everything else. And I promise myself that when this is finished, I will take it down and look at it properly. Sunday, Julian Roth comes to lunch and brings flowers for Celeste and a bottle for me. It is a very good bottle. He hands it over with both hands like a man in a film about tea ceremonies and says, "For the man who took the prize." "Thank you," I say. "Do you drink much, Nate?" "Almost never." "Wise," he says. "Terrible for the liver," and he smiles at me with all of his teeth, and I smile back at him with all of mine. Out in the orangery, a 40-year-old macaw shifts on his perch and files the whole afternoon away for some later date of his own choosing. Monday, day 9, I go and find Simon Hollis. He runs the 2 small hospitals out of an office above a pharmacy on the east side, and there is a photograph of a rowing 8 on the wall and a coffee machine he clearly bought himself. He is 33, and he looks like a man who has been awake since 5. He does not know who I am for about 4 seconds. Then he says, "Oh, the husband. Congratulations." "Thank you," I say. "Can I have 10 minutes? He looks at the door behind me as if he expects somebody else to come through it. "Sure," he says. "Why?" "Because I want to tell you something you can check," I say. "And if it is true, you will listen to the second thing." "Go on then," he says, in the voice of a man who is being polite to his cousin's new toy. "On Tuesday, your capital request for the pediatric wing comes back from the finance office marked deferred pending review," I say. "It will not be signed by the board. It will be signed by your Aunt Marianne." Simon Hollis puts his cup down. "That request has been approved in principle since September." "Tuesday," I say. "The word is deferred and the signature is hers." "If you are trying to make me angry with my family," he says, "you have chosen a slow method." Then he asks me to leave politely, and I leave politely, and I am back in my car in under a minute with my heart going like a bird. That was a page. That was a whole page of my map, spent on a Tuesday, and if I have remembered it wrong, I have nothing. I have not remembered it wrong. In the life I already lived, that deferral went out on the Tuesday of the second week of November, and Simon shouted about it at a family dinner in front of 9 people, and Marianne told him she had done it to protect him from himself. On Wednesday morning, my phone rings, and it is a number I do not know. Simon Hollis says, without any greeting at all, "How did you know that?" "The second thing," I say. "Can I come to your office?" He says a word under his breath and then says, "Yes." He has the deferral on his desk when I get there. He has it turned face up, deliberately, like a card in a game. "How?" he says. "I am not going to tell you," I say. "I know that is intolerable, and I am sorry. Everything I tell you from here will be checkable in 3 days or less, and you can stop believing me anytime you like." He sits back. "All right, talk." "You are going to lose in March," I say, not narrowly. "Marianne has the votes, and she has had them since the summer, and the wing is going to be used to hang the loss on you, and afterwards you will sell your shares at a price that will make you sick for the rest of your life." Simon Hollis does not say anything for a while. Then he says quietly, "I know about the votes." That surprises me, and I let it show. He shrugs. "I am not stupid," he says. "I am just stubborn," which is worse, because stubborn feels like a virtue right up until it costs you your house. "There is an offer in your email," I say. "Denver." He goes very still. "It is a smaller job with a worse title and a much better life, and you are going to turn it down in about 10 days because you think you can still win here." "Who have you talked to?" "Nobody." "Take it," I say. "Take it in the next 2 weeks, resign your seat, and let the March vote happen without you in the room." "Why on earth would you want that?" "Because I want your seat to be empty in December," I say. And Simon Hollis, to his very great credit, laughs. It is not a happy laugh. "Ah," he says, "there it is. Everyone in that family wants something. At least you said it out loud in the first 5 minutes." Then he leans forward and says, "Why December?" And I say, "Because a seat that falls empty between meetings gets filled at a special sitting, and I want a special sitting." He knows the charter. Of course he does. He has been fighting his aunt with it for a decade. I watch him turn the page in his head and arrive at the compound committee, and then I watch him arrive somewhere else entirely, somewhere I did not put him. "You want the batch logs?" he says. I do not answer that, which is an answer. Simon looks at me for a long moment. Then he says, "My father asked for those logs in the spring of the year I turned 29. He was told the committee had reviewed them. He asked again, and he was told the committee had reviewed them. He is a mild man, my father." He stopped asking. There it is. I did not know that. There are things in this house that were happening before I ever walked into it, and I have spent 9 days assuming my map was the only thing anyone had. "What is in them?" Simon says. "Something that killed a young man 3 years ago," I say, "and a second young man was scheduled." Was, I say. Simon Hollis stands up and goes and looks out of his window at a car park for about a minute and a half. When he turns around, he says, "If I resign, my seat does not just sit there. Somebody claims it." "Tell me who can," I say, because I want to hear him say it, and I want to be certain I have read the clause correctly. "A family member can claim it inside 21 days at a special sitting," he says. "If no family member claims it, the nomination passes to the largest outside holder for that term." That has never happened, because there has never been a large outside holder. "There is one now," I say. Simon's face changes. "Kane," he says. "That block that got bought 3 years ago and never voted. That is Kane. Everybody assumed it was a pension fund." "Peter Kane bought it," I say, 6 months before he died. His sister inherited it, and she has never voted a single share, and nobody in your family has thought about it once, because it has never mattered. And if my seat goes empty, then it matters enormously for 21 days, I say. Simon Hollis sits down on the edge of his own desk, in exactly the way Rosalind Kane sat on hers, and I have a strange moment of wanting to laugh. Then he says, "My cousin will claim it inside a day. She will not let an outsider near that committee." "Yes," I say, "she will." "And you want that, more than I have ever wanted anything," I say. He asks me one more question, and it is the right one. "What does it cost me?" "You leave a fight you are going to lose 4 months early with your shares intact," I say, "and a diagnostics company signs a service contract with your new employer in Denver in January, which will make you look like a genius in your first month. Can you promise that?" "No," I say. "I can ask. That is different, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." Simon Hollis smiles for the first time in the whole conversation. "Do you know," he says, "you are the first person connected to my family who has said no to me in 10 years. I go home and I sit in the car outside the gates for a while, because I have just spent 2 pages and made a promise I cannot keep on my own, and because there is a lunch today. The lunch is Marianne's idea, and my father and Ren are invited, and I have been dreading it since Thursday. They arrive at 1. My father has had a haircut. Ren is wearing her school shoes polished, which she has never once done for school, and the sight of that nearly finishes me on the front steps. They are seated at the far end of a table for 14. Anselm has made something extraordinary, and nobody comments on it. Marianne asks my father twice whether the glass business is seasonal, in the tone of a woman asking whether a disease is contagious. Then she turns to Ren and says, "And you are the clever one." Ren says, "I am the only one," and my father makes a small noise. Marianne laughs. She has a very good laugh, and she uses it like a tool. "There is a science program," she says, "at the university for 6th form students. Places are competitive. Wasirons dito our trust. Bonds di chas anes I always konas dapain." Ren's whole face comes up. That is the thing. That is what makes it unforgivable. My sister's whole face comes up like a window opening. "Tell us something scientific," Marianne says. "Go on. Impress the table." The table looks at a 16-year-old girl in polished school shoes and waits to be entertained. I put my hand flat on the cloth. Under it, my knuckles are white. Beside me, Celeste is watching her mother with an expression of mild amusement, the way you watch a cat with something. Ren says, "All right, glass is a liquid that has forgotten how to move." Somebody at the middle of the table says, "That is not true actually," and starts explaining amorphous solids. And Marianne says, "Oh dear," and the table laughs, and my sister sits there with her ears going red and her chin absolutely level. Then grandmother Iris Hollis says, from the head of the table, into a silence, "It is a very good sentence." Everybody stops. "It is not accurate," Iris says, "and neither is most of what is said at this table, and none of the rest of it is memorable." She looks down the length of the cloth at Marianne. "The child made a picture in one line. Do it yourself, Marianne. Go on, impress the table." Marianne Hollis does not say anything at all. Iris turns to Ren and says, "You will apply to that program, and I will read your application myself. And if it is any good, I will be extremely rude to anyone who does not take you." Ren says, "Thank you," in a very small voice, and then eats her lunch, and my father sits beside her with his ruined hands and his good cuffs and looks at his plate for a while. Afterwards, in the hall, Celeste kisses my cheek and says, "Your sister is funny." And I say, "Yes, she is." And Celeste says, "Mother did not mean anything by it." "She meant all of it," I say. "It comes out flatter than I intended." Celeste looks at me for a second, surprised, because the piece of furniture has said something. Then she smiles and says, "You are cross. That is nice. I have not seen you cross yet." "You will," I say, and I make it sound like a joke. And she laughs and goes to take a call. I get my father and my sister into the car myself, At the door, Ren says, "That old woman is the only person in there worth anything. She is the most dangerous person in there," I say. "Same thing," says Ren. Bo Tran is coming on shift as they leave. He holds the gate. I stop and I say, "Bo, I'm going to ask you something strange. Would your daughter like a job in this house for the Christmas period?" Nadia needs hands, and she is embarrassed to ask. He looks at me carefully. "She is studying, sir. For the Christmas period," I say. 6 weeks. It pays badly, and the hours are unsociable, and she will be inside this house, with a badge, where everybody can see her. There is a pause, and then Bo Tran says, "Thank you," and I go inside, because I do not want him to look at my face while I am doing arithmetic about which of us will be believed in a room in December. That night, Celeste comes upstairs at 11 and does not have the cocoa. She has a hot water bottle, and she gets into bed with her eyes shut and says, "I have had this headache for 4 days." Everything in me goes very quiet. "I am going to see Emmett on Friday," she says. There it is, 11 days in, and my wife is about to walk into a Hollis clinic and hand a Hollis physician a tube of her own blood, with the whole case sitting inside it. If Shaw runs a panel, he sees the band. He has seen it before, on Peter Kane, on me, on whoever else has been through that clinic. He picks up a telephone and calls Julian Roth, and then they know. And the sample is spoiled, and the log goes into a fire, and my wife gets treated, and my father's shop is gone by March. I have about 3 seconds. "Do not do that," I say. She opens one eye. "Why?" "Because he will tell your mother," I say. Celeste opens the other eye. "He tells your mother everything," I say. "He told her about your appendix when you were 19. If you walk into that clinic in December, 3 weeks before a vote, and it goes into your file that you have been having headaches for a month, how long do you think it stays in the file?" She sits up. "I am not saying he would do it out of malice," I say. "I am saying your mother will know by Saturday, and Simon will know by Sunday. And in March, somebody will say the word migraines in a room where you need everybody thinking you are made of iron." She says nothing for a good while. Then she says, slowly, "The lilies." "What?" "Julian has been bringing lilies for a fortnight," she says. "I always used to say the smell of them makes my head go." I keep my face completely still. "That would explain it," I say. Celeste gets out of bed, walks to the landing, and shouts down for Nadia. At 11:30 at night, 4 vases of white lilies go out of my house and into the bins behind the greenhouses, and my wife comes back to bed pleased with herself for solving something. I lie in the dark next to her. My hands are shaking. That is the closest thing to a disaster I have had, and I did not do it with a clever plan. I did it by knowing which door in her head to knock on. She is not afraid of dying. She has never once considered it. She is afraid of somebody in her family knowing something about her that she did not choose to tell them. That is the lock. Everything from here goes through that lock. On Thursday, Julian brings lilies again. Celeste says something short to him in the hall, and he apologizes and looks bewildered, and takes the flowers away himself. And I watch from the stairs and eat an apple like a man with no thoughts in his head at all. 27 days. Friday morning, I do the thing I have been putting off, which is spend a whole page in public. The Hollis lab imports a reagent from a supplier in Rotterdam in cold containers 4 times a year. In the life I already lived, one of those containers sat at the port from the 10th of December until the 4th of January, because the supplier changed a customs code and nobody at the Hollis end noticed for 9 days. It cost them a quarter of the winter's outpatient testing, and Julian Roth blamed a shipping clerk in a meeting I heard about from Nadia while she was doing the curtains. So on Friday morning at breakfast with Marianne and Celeste at the table, I say, "Can I ask something stupid?" Celeste says, "Always." "The lab reagent that comes in from the Netherlands," I say. "Does anybody check the customs code against the supplier's own paperwork, or do we just use last quarter's?" There is a silence of a particular kind. Marianne looks at me, the way you look at a dog that has spoken. "Why?" says Celeste. "I made a delivery to a bonded warehouse once," I say, "which is true. My father and I did it for 12 years. Suppliers change codes when they change packaging, and nobody tells the buyer, and the container sits at the port until somebody drives down and argues in person." Celeste picks up her phone. By 9:30, the Hollis logistics manager has called Rotterdam. By 11, he has found the new code, which was changed in October. By 2, Julian Roth is in the front hall asking who caught it. Celeste says, "My husband," and Julian's face does something small and interesting. At dinner, Marianne says my name for the first time. She says, "Nathan, do you know about shipping? And I say, I know about bonded warehouses, ma'am. And she says, and that is the whole of it, and it is a door coming open about 1/4 of an inch. That night, Celeste is in a good mood. She sits on the end of the bed with her hair down and says, that was $80,000 you saved this morning, was it? Or, probably. She looks at me with her head tilted. Where did I get you? A furnace, I say. She laughs. Then she says something that goes through me like a wire. She says, I am glad I married you. And she means it. That is what turns my stomach. She means it entirely, and it changes nothing about the fact that 6 more cups were meant for me, and she will not stop. And if the amber had gone the way she planned, she would have sat beside my bed in this room and held my hand and cried real tears in April. People are not one thing. I did not know that before this. I would have preferred a monster. A monster would be restful. I say, I am glad too, and it is the most expensive lie I have told yet. Saturday, I meet Rosalind in the car park. 26 days, she says. Simon Hollis resigns on Wednesday, I say. She stops walking. You did it. He did it. I gave him a Tuesday and he checked it. There's a thing he wants, and I told him I could not promise it. What thing? A service contract for a Denver hospital group in January, I say, from a diagnostics company. I said I would ask and I would not lie about it. So I am asking, and if you say no, then I go back and tell him no. Rosalind Kane looks at me over the roof of her car. Then she says, you told a man you could not promise it. Yes. She takes a breath and lets it out. You are going to be very annoying, she says. I will have somebody look at the Denver group on Monday. If they are any good, they get a contract because they are good, and if they are terrible, they get nothing. And you can explain that to your cousin yourself. The man is no relation of mine. He is going to be your ally for the next month, she says, which in that family is closer than blood. Then she opens the car and takes out a folder and hands it to me and says, now sit down, because I have something and I do not think you are going to like it. We sit in her car with the heater on. The folder is her brother's. Peter bought those Hollis shares in the September before he died, she says. I always thought it was an investment. It was not an investment. She turns a page. There is a photocopy of a handwritten note, and the handwriting is small and neat and slants backwards. He was corresponding with a nurse, she says. There are 4 letters. The nurse is careful and never names anybody. The last one is dated 11 days before he died, and it says that the pharmacy log for the outpatient clinic has been altered and that she has kept her own copy. Ivy Cobb, I say. Rosalind's head comes round. How do you know that name? She stopped me in a corridor last week, I say. 9 letters, unanswered, batch references that do not match. I told her not to send a 10th. Rosalind Kane sits back in her seat and looks through the windscreen at a concrete wall for a while. Then she says, my brother had it. He had a nurse with a copy of the log, and he had bought into the company so he could ask questions at the table, and he was 11 days from doing something about it. And then he had his 7th cup, I say. Yes, she says. Her voice does not do anything dramatic. It just goes very flat, and her hands stay on her knees, and after a moment, I put my hand over one of them, which is not a thing I planned to do. She looks at my hand and does not move it. Tell me one true thing about yourself, she says. Not about the house, something else. I think about it properly, because she has asked properly. My mother died when I was 19, and my sister was 8, I say. And for 2 years, I did the school run. And I got it wrong constantly. There is a woman at that school who still calls me Ren's dad, and I have never corrected her, because the first time she said it, I nearly cried in a car park. Rosalind Kane says, all right, and turns her hand over under mine, and we sit in an underground car park with the heater on for about 4 minutes without saying anything. Then she says, 26 days, and I say, I know, and we get on with it. Now the second problem, which has been walking towards me since the first week, and which I have been refusing to look at. By the 4th week of the Amber course, I should be visibly ill. In the life I already lived, by the end of November, I had lost 11 pounds. I could not do the stairs to the 3rd floor without stopping on the landing and pretending to look at a picture. I stopped eating meat because it tasted of coins. It is the 17th of November, and I have never felt better in my life. And there is a chemist in this house twice a week who is expecting a result. So on Sunday, I start dying. It is the strangest work I have ever done. I know exactly what it looks like, because I did it for real, and doing it on purpose is like playing a piece of music you learned in a hospital. I stop taking the stairs at speed. Halfway up the 2nd flight, I stop and put my hand on the banister and look at the portrait of somebody's uncle for 6 seconds, and then I go on. I put my fork down with food still on the plate. I do it in front of Anselm, who notices because Anselm notices everything, and who says nothing to me and something to Nadia. I sleep late twice. I say the word tired once, only once in the whole week, and I say it as a complaint about the weather. Celeste says, "On Monday, you have gone quiet, have I?" She looks at me with her head tilted for a second too long. Then she says, "You should eat more," and pushes the bread towards me. And I take a piece and eat half of it and leave the rest on the side of the plate where she can see it. I do not know how to describe what that does to a person. My wife pushed the bread towards me, and I do not think she was performing. I think she genuinely wanted me to eat, in the same week and with the same hands and out of the same fondness with which she was counting down to my funeral. On Tuesday, Julian Roth comes upstairs. He knocks, which is new. I am in the window seat with a book. He puts his head round the door and says, "They told me you were resting. I chin bites eyes. I nasi na sachie. Am I reading?" He comes in anyway and stands at the end of the room with his hands in his pockets, and he looks at me for a while in the light from the window, and I let him look. I let him see the shadow under my eye and the way I am sitting with my shoulder against the wall. "You look tired," he says. "I have not been sleeping much. Any headaches?" I say, "Some," and then, because a well man says it as a complaint, and a sick man says it as a confession, I make it a complaint. "It is these lamps," I say. "The lamps in this house are for people with better eyes than mine." Julian smiles. "Where?" he says. "Where what?" "The headaches. Front, back, one side." And I look at him with absolutely no expression on my face at all, and I say, "Above the left eye, mostly." Something goes out of Julian Roth's shoulders. It is the smallest thing. If I had not spent 7 weeks being read by this man from the other side of a bed, I would not have caught it. "You should see Emmett," he says. "Do not leave it. I hate doctors." "Everybody hates doctors," he says, walking to the window. Then he stops. He has stopped because he is looking at the orchid. It is in the blue pot. It was a nice white orchid in a small pot on the 3rd of November. It is now a monstrous thing with 14 flowers on 2 spikes and roots coming over the rim like something arriving. Julian Roth stands with his hands in his pockets and looks at a plant. I look at the back of his head and I think, very clearly, that if he picks that pot up, I am going to hit him with the lamp, and that this will be the stupidest end to anything in the history of the world. He says, "That is doing well. Nadia feeds it something," I say. "She will not tell me what. She is extremely superstitious about it." Julian laughs. Then he says, "My mother had one of those. They are meant to be difficult." "Apparently not in this house," I say. "Apparently not," he says, and he takes his hands out of his pockets and he goes. I sit absolutely still until the door closes. Then I get up and go to the window and stand there with my hands on the sill until they stop shaking. That evening, I carry the blue pot down to the greenhouse and give it to Nadia and tell her it is a present because she liked it and she is delighted, and it goes into the potting shed among about 90 other plants where nobody in the world will ever look at it again. I buy a new orchid at a supermarket for $11 and put it in a different pot on the same table, and from that night on, the cocoa goes out of the window into a flower bed that already has a rosemary bush dying in it for perfectly ordinary reasons. On Wednesday, Simon Hollis resigns his seat by letter, effective immediately, citing a new position abroad. I hear about it because a door slams somewhere below me at 9:10 in the morning, and then another one, and then Marianne Hollis's voice goes up the stairwell like weather. By 10, the house is full. Marianne, Celeste, 2 lawyers, and a man from the company secretary's office with a laptop and the face of somebody who would like to be anywhere else. I sit on the stairs, out of the way, in a jumper, holding a mug, being nobody. The lawyer explains the vacancy clause. He explains the 21 days. He explains, and I watch Celeste Hollis hear it, that if no family member claims the seat at a special sitting inside that window, the nomination for the remainder of the term passes to the largest outside holder. "Which is," says the man with the laptop, and then he says it, and the room goes quiet in a completely new way. "Kane," says Marianne. "Kane Diagnostics has 11% of this company." 11.5, says the man with the laptop. "Since when?" "Since 3 years ago last September," he says. "The block has never been voted. Nobody in that hall is looking at anybody else." Then Celeste says, "What does the seat carry?" The lawyer checks. "Estates, procurement, and the compound committee," he says. And there it is. I am sitting on a staircase, eating nothing and looking at nothing, and I watch my wife's face do the single most important thing it will do in 5 weeks. Nothing. It does absolutely nothing at all, which takes her about a second and a half of very hard work. Then she says lightly, "Well, we cannot have strangers in the estates file. Mother, I will take it." Marianne says, "Do not be ridiculous. You are chair in March. You cannot hold a committee seat as well." For a term, Celeste says. 4 months. It is procurement and reading, it is not glamorous, and it means nobody has to explain our supplier terms to a competitor. I put my mug down very carefully so that it does not make a sound. The lawyer says, "Then we call a special sitting." He looks at his calendar. There is a notice period. The earliest date that clears the notice is the 18th of December, 27 days from today. The band dies at 40. She drank on the 3rd of November. I do the arithmetic 3 times on a staircase with my heart going, and I get the same answer each time. Day 40 is the 12th of December. The 18th is day 46. 6 days too late. I go upstairs and lock the bathroom door and read page 29 again, and then page 30, which I skipped the first time because I was excited. Notice of a special sitting shall be 21 clear days, unless every holder of a seat consents in writing to a shorter period. Every holder of a seat, 11 signatures, including Marianne, including Iris, including a woman in Lisbon who has not attended a meeting since her hip went. Nobody signs a paper like that because a stranger asks. People sign a paper like that when they are frightened, and they sign it in an afternoon. So I need this family frightened by Friday. I call Rosalind from the greenhouse with the heaters running so nothing carries. Simon resigned this morning, I say. The sitting lands on the 18th. That is 6 days past the band. She swears. Then she says, "All right," and I hear her chair move, which is a sound I am learning means she has started working. "Can you shorten it?" she says. 11 signatures in writing. I can get about 4 on merit. I need the other 7 out of fear, and the only thing in the world that frightens that family is you. There is a pause. Then she says, "Tell me exactly what the clause says about my nomination." The nomination passes to the largest outside holder for the remainder of the term if no family member claims the seat inside 21 days, I say. It does not say when you may nominate. It says when the right passes. Rosalind Kane says, "Oh," in a soft voice, and then she says, "So I can nominate now, today, conditionally. Nobody can stop me putting a name on paper. And a nominee, I say. A nominee to a board vacancy may requisition the books of any committee attached to that seat from the date of nomination," she says, in the voice of a woman reading. "It is standard. It is in every set of articles in this country. Nathan, it is in theirs." Read it out. She reads it out. It is section 14, and it is 9 lines long, and it has been sitting in that filing since before I was born. So, on Thursday morning, Kane Diagnostics writes formally to the Hollis Company's secretary and nominates a forensic accountant named Priya Raman to the vacant seat, conditional upon the 21 days expiring. The same letter requests, under section 14, the compound committee minutes and the pharmacy logs for the last 4 years. Rosalind sends me the letter at 8:40 in the morning. At 8:57, I hear Marianne Hollis scream, I'm Arnei. I have heard a lot of shouting in this house. I have never heard that woman make that sound. By 9:30, there are 5 cars on the gravel. By 10, the dining room has been turned into a war room, and I am carrying coffee in and out of it because nobody notices a man with a tray. Julian Roth arrives at 10:10 with his coat still on and his face the color of paper. 4 years of pharmacy logs, he is saying as I come through the door with the pot. 4 years. Do you understand what that is? That is every tolerance study, every batch, every reconciliation handed to a competitor. She cannot have them until she is confirmed, says one of the lawyers. She can have them from nomination, says the other one, who has actually read section 14. That is the point of section 14. She has nominated. Then unnominate her, says Marianne. You cannot unnominate somebody else's nominee, ma'am. I put the coffee down and go out and stand in the hall with my back against the wall and my hands flat on the plaster behind me, and I make myself breathe slowly because a man on the wrong side of that door has just watched a chemist go white about a pharmacy log. At 11, Celeste comes out to find me. She is very calm. That is how I know how bad it is inside her. "Nathan," she says, "you saved us $80,000 on a customs code because you read the paperwork. Come and read some paperwork." So I go in and I sit at the end of the table, and Marianne Hollis does not object, which is its own small piece of history. The lawyer is explaining that the seat can be claimed at a special sitting, and that the earliest sitting is the 18th, and that until the sitting, the nominee's requisition stands. He is 22 days, Celeste says. She can read our logs for 22 days. She can read them from Monday when the copies are produced, says the lawyer. Julian says we should refuse. Then she goes to court, says the lawyer, and she wins in about a week, and the judgment is public. And the phrase that goes into the newspapers is Hollis refuses to produce pharmacy records. Silence. I look at the table for a moment, and then I say, in the mildest voice I own, why is the sitting on the 18th? The lawyer says, notice, 21 clear days. Can that be shortened? I say. He blinks. With unanimous written consent of all seats, yes. Everybody looks at everybody. That is all I do. I do not push it. I do not suggest a date. I do not say another word for the rest of the meeting. I sit at the end of a table and let 11 people arrive by themselves at a place I have already built. By 1 o'clock, the company secretary is drafting consent forms. By 3, 4 of them are signed. By 6, 7. At 7:30, Marianne Hollis says, from the far end of the dining room, my mother-in-law will not sign. Iris Hollis is in the orangery. She is in the orangery because she has been in the orangery all day on purpose, the way old women who own things are in other rooms on purpose. Celeste says, I will talk to her. Marianne says, you will make it worse. She thinks you are hasty. And then, because the day has gone the way it has gone, Marianne Hollis turns and looks straight at me and says, Nathan, she likes you. Go and be a glassmaker at her for 20 minutes. So I take the consent form and I walk down the corridor to the orangery. And my heart is going so hard I can feel it in my jaw. Because everything I have built since the 3rd of November is now sitting on whether an 81-year-old woman signs a piece of paper. The orangery is warm and smells of wet earth. Bishop is on a stand by the lemon trees. Iris is in a wicker chair with a rug on her knees and a book face down on the arm. She says, without looking up, they sent the boy. They sent the boy, I agree. Sit down. Do not sit there. That is where the water comes through the roof. I sit somewhere else. Bishop looks at me with one eye and says, not here, in a voice that is unnervingly close to Celeste's. Iris says, he has been doing that for a fortnight. I have no idea where he got it. I say nothing at all. She holds her hand out. I give her the form. She reads it properly, all of it, which takes about 4 minutes, and I sit in a warm glass room and watch a woman read. Then she says, why does my granddaughter want a procurement seat? Because she does not want Kane in the compound file, I say. And why does Kane want the compound file? I have thought about lying to her for the entire length of the corridor, and I decide, sitting there, that I am not going to do it. Not to her. I can lie to everyone else in this house forever and sleep, but if I lie to Iris Hollis, I lose the only clean thing I have got. So I say, because Kane thinks something in that lab killed her brother. Iris Hollis does not move. Bishop shuffles on his stand. Then she says in a completely ordinary voice, does she have a name for it? No, I say. Not a name, a mark on a blood panel that nobody could explain. Iris closes the book on the arm of her chair, which she had not been reading anyway. My husband died on a Thursday in April, she says. He was 54. He had been unwell for about 2 months in a way that nobody could put a finger on, and then his heart stopped, and the certificate said what certificates say. She looks out at the dark garden through the glass. His brother took the company for 11 years, she says, and lost about a third of it, and was extremely kind to me at the funeral. I have never been able to prove one single thing, not one in 40 years. I have the certificate in a drawer upstairs, and I have read it more times than I have read anything else. I do not say anything. There is nothing to say, and she does not want anything said. Do you know why the panel is in the charter, she says? Everyone says it is because you are careful, I say. Everyone says it is because I am mad, she says. That is fine, I let them. It is in the charter because I could not prove it, and I decided that the next time somebody in this family is quietly killed, there will be a piece of paper with a date on it and 11 people in the room when it is read. She says that the way another woman would give you a recipe. I sit in a warm glass room with a pulse in my throat and understand that I have spent 3 weeks building a trap that a widow built 40 years before me, and that all I have actually done is walk into her house and find it. Iris says, give me the pen. She signs it. Her signature is enormous and completely illegible. Then she says, what date do they want? They have not said, ma'am. Tell them the 11th, she says. Tuesday. I have a hospital thing on the 10th, and I'm not doing 2 days in a row at my age. The 11th of December, day 39. I get the form back into my hands without dropping it, which I consider an achievement. At the door, she says, boy, ma'am, You went white just now, she says. When I said the word killed, I am not good at this, ma'am. No, she says. You are frighteningly good at it. That is what I am remarking on. Go away. I walk back down the corridor with a signed consent form, and I have to stop halfway and put my hand on a radiator. 21 days. The sitting is the 11th. The band is good until the 12th. I have 1 day of margin in 5 weeks of work, and 1 day is not margin. 1 day is a rumor of margin. 19 days. On Saturday, my father calls me at 7 in the morning, which he has never done in his life, and says, "Do not worry, everybody is fine." That is how you know somebody is not fine. The shop was broken into in the night. The front bay was smashed, the till was taken, and about 40 pieces of finished work were swept off the shelves onto the floor, including 11 of the 12 cups for Celesta's aunt. My father heard it and came downstairs in his slippers, in the dark, and put his hand into a shelf of broken glass in the doorway. 18 stitches across the palm and 2 fingers. The surgeon says he will get most of it back, and my father, who has worked a furnace since he was 19, keeps saying the word most in a way that I am going to hear for the rest of my life. I stand in that hospital corridor at 9 in the morning, and I do arithmetic that I do not want to do. The break-in is not on my map. There was no break-in. In the life I already lived, the shop was quiet all winter, and the 12 cups were delivered in January, and the lease was canceled in March by a letter. So this is mine. I did this. I made a nobody visible. I caught a customs code in front of a chemist. I made my father's name a thing that gets said at a Hollis breakfast table, and 10 days later, somebody put a brick through his window. I do not know that it was them. I want to be honest about that, because I could tell you it was Julian, and it would be a better story. I never find out. It might have been 2 teenagers and a bad night. That is what the map does to you. It makes you certain about 5 months and useless about everything else. Ren finds me in the corridor. She is not crying. She says, "They took the till and the till had $90 in it." And then she says, "Why would somebody?" And then she does cry. And I hold on to my sister outside a surgical ward and say nothing, because I do not have anything true that is also kind. At 11 o'clock, Celeste arrives. I did not call her. Nadia called her. She comes down the corridor in a coat worth more than the shop, and she goes straight past me to my father, and she takes his good hand in both of hers and says, "Mr. Reyes, I am so sorry." And then she says, "The shop will be reglazed and refitted this week, and the stock will be replaced at valuation. And there is a man coming this afternoon about an alarm, and none of it comes out of your pocket." My father says, "That is very kind, but..." "There is no but," Celeste says. "You are family." She means it. She means every word of it. My wife stands in a hospital corridor and rebuilds my father's business out of pure warm feeling on a Saturday morning, and she is the woman who put the first dose in the cup. And both of those things are completely true at the same time. Ren looks at her with her mouth slightly open. On the way out, she says to me, quietly, "She is quite nice." "Yes," I say. "You said she was very pleasant." "She is that too," I say. That night in the car, I put my head back against the seat, and I understand something that I should have understood 3 weeks ago. She is not going to stop. Not because she hates me. She likes me. She will keep liking me all the way through it. She will pay for the alarm and mean it. And in April, she will hold my hand and cry. None of that has ever been in conflict with the arithmetic, because in her head, those are 2 different drawers, and she has never once opened them at the same time. There is no version of this where I talk to her. There is no scene where I tell her what I know and she puts down the cup. I have played it out about 200 times in that bed at 3 in the morning, and it always ends with me in a car, with the engine running in a closed garage and a note in my handwriting that somebody else typed. So it is the 11th of December, or it is nothing. On Monday, my trans starts in the house. She is 19. She is doing an accountancy qualification at night, and she has her father's way of standing slightly out of the light. Nadia puts her on linen and silver. I stop her in the back corridor on the first afternoon and say, "My, one thing. If anybody in this house ever asks you to take something from a room, or to carry something out to a car, or to be somewhere at a time that seems strange, you say yes, and then you tell your father, and your father tells me." She looks at me with exactly her father's face. "Sir, is this a bad house?" "It is a house where people are careless," I say. "You will be fine. Just do that one thing." She says, "Yes, sir," and goes off with an armful of napkins, and I stand in that corridor and I think about the fact that I put her in here. That is the second thing I have done that is not on the map. I am starting to understand that my map only tells me what happened when I was doing nothing, and that every time I move, another page of it stops being true. 15 days. On Wednesday, I meet Rosalind at the hospital because my father has a dressing change and because she says she will come, and I say she does not need to, and she comes. She is very good with him. She asks about a kneeling, and he tells her, and she asks a second question, which is the test my father has been applying to human beings for 61 years, and she passes it. Afterwards, we walk down to the car park level, and she says, Priya Raman got 2 boxes of minutes on Monday and about 900 pages of nothing. Nothing. The compound committee minutes for 4 years are 22 pages, she says. 22. For a committee that is supposed to sign off every study. The rest is estates and procurement and a man arguing about a boiler for 6 years. Which means they were never written, she says, or they were written and they are somewhere else. And either way, on the 11th of December, there is going to be a woman at that table asking where the minutes are, in front of Iris Hollis. Priya asks that, I say. Priya asks that whether or not she is confirmed, Rosalind says. She has the right to attend the sitting. She is a nominee until the vote is taken. Nathan, she is going to be in that room. I stop walking. That had not occurred to me. I have been so far inside my own machine that I never once thought about who else is standing in it. I say, does she know why she is really there? She knows there is a possible fraud in a pharmacy log, Rosalind says. She does not know about your wedding. She does not know about my brother. And she is not going to, because if she knew, she would have to declare it. Good, I say. Then Rosalind says, and now I ask you the thing I have been not asking you for a month. Here it comes. On the 11th, she says, what actually happens? Walk me through it. Because from where I am standing, 11 people sit down, a nurse comes in with a trolley. They all give blood, somebody reads out a list of numbers, and your wife has a stripe on hers. And then what? And then Iris Hollis is in the room, I say. That is not a plan, Rosalind says. That is a hope with a nice old lady in it. She is right, and I have known she is right for about 9 days. A band on a panel says something was in her blood, she says. It does not say what. It does not say who gave it to her. And it certainly does not say she gave the same thing to you and to my brother. Julian Roth will stand up in that room and say the word artifact, and he will be believed because he is the only chemist there and because everybody would very much like him to be right. I know. So what closes it? The batch log, I say. Ivy Cobb's copy. Rosalind Kane stops in the middle of a car park level and says, then why in God's name have you not gone and got it? Because she has been carrying it for 3 years, and she has been ignored 9 times, I say. And if I go to her now as a Hollis and ask for it, she gives it to me, and I put it in front of that family, and they settle with her out of court in a fortnight and burn it. She has to hand it over in the room, Rosalind says slowly. She has to be sitting in that room with it, I say. On the 11th, in front of 11 seats and a nominee and an old woman with a certificate in a drawer upstairs. That is the only version where it survives contact with them. Rosalind Kane leans against a concrete pillar and looks at me. And how does a dismissed nurse get into a private board sitting of a company that dismissed her? I say, she does not get in. She is invited. By whom? By the person who is claiming the seat, I say. There is a long silence in an underground car park. You are going to make Celeste invite her, Rosalind says. Yes. How? By making Ivy Cobb the safest person in the world for her to have in that room, I say. And Rosalind Kane looks at me for a long moment and then says quietly, remind me never to marry you. Making Ivy Cobb safe takes me 2 days, and it is the best work I do in either of my lives. On Thursday evening, Celeste is at the desk in the study with the requisition file and a headache that has nothing to do with anybody, and I bring her tea and stand there until she looks up. And I say a stupid thing, I say. Your stupid thing saved us $80,000, she says. Go on. What is Kane's actual attack, I say, at the sitting? If you were her, what would you say? Celeste puts her pen down. She likes this game and she is very good at it. She would say our compound committee does not meet, she says. 22 pages in 4 years. She would say we run studies through a clinic without oversight. And you would say what? That the committee works by circulation and not by meeting, she says. Which is true and which sounds like a lie. Then she is going to hit you with a person, I say. Celeste looks at me. Nobody in a room full of directors is moved by 22 pages, I say. She will bring somebody who wrote in and got no answer. One nurse, one letter, read out loud. Then the minutes stop being paperwork and become a person you ignored. There is a long silence in the study. Then Celeste says, "Is there such a person?" "There is a nurse called Cobb at the North Clinic who has written 9 letters about consent forms," I say. "She stopped me in a corridor at the opening in November and complained to me because she has run out of people. If Kane has her, you lose the room in about 90 seconds. Celeste is completely still for a moment. Then she picks up her phone and does not dial it and turns it over in her hand twice. 9 letters, she says. 9. To whom? Compound committee, I say, which is a mailbox that Julian's assistant empties. She puts the phone down. Right, she says, so we answer her. Answer her, promote her, and put her in the room, I say. If the consent process at that clinic has a gap, the woman who has been writing in about it for a year is the only person alive who can stand up and say it is being fixed. Kane cannot use a witness who is sitting on your side of the table. Celeste Hollis looks at me with something new in her face, and I do not enjoy it as much as I thought I would. Where did I get you, she says, for the second time in 3 weeks. A furnace, I say. She laughs and starts writing. By 9 o'clock that evening, there is a letter going out to Ivy Cobb, inviting her to a meeting. By Friday lunchtime, Ivy Cobb has a new title, Consent Compliance Lead for the Outpatient Network, a pay grade she has been refused twice, and an instruction to attend a special board sitting on the 11th of December to answer any questions on clinic consent practice. Julian Roth finds out on Friday afternoon and comes to the house. I hear it from the landing. He says her name 3 times in about a minute. He says the words disproportionate and unnecessary and inflammatory. He says, "You are inviting a disgruntled employee into a boardroom." And Celeste says she is not disgruntled. She wrote 9 letters and got nothing back, and the mailbox she wrote to is yours. That is the first crack. I stand on a landing with a book I am not reading, and I listen to the first crack go up the middle of it. Then Julian says something quieter that I do not catch, and Celeste says, "No," in a voice I have never heard her use with him, and a door goes. On Saturday, I drive out to see Ivy Cobb because I am not going to let that woman walk into that room without knowing what she is walking into. She lives in a flat over a dry cleaner with 2 cats and a wall of ring binders. She lets me in and does not offer me anything and stands with her arms folded. "I have been promoted," she says. "Am I supposed to thank you?" "No," I say. 12 months of letters and then a Hollis marries in and I get a grade 7 and a seat in a boardroom in 3 weeks. She looks at me steadily. What am I for? She is quick and she is angry, and she has every right to both. So I tell her the truth, or the part of it that will survive being said out loud. You are for the 15 minutes at that sitting when a nominee from Kane Diagnostics asks why the compound committee has 22 pages of minutes in 4 years. I say, "My wife thinks you are the answer to that question. You are going to be asked in front of 11 seats whether the consent process at the North Clinic is sound." And what do I say? "You say what is true?" I say. Ivy Cobb looks at me for a long time. "The batch references on 11 consent forms do not match anything in the pharmacy log," she says. "That is true. I have photographs of both. I have had them for 3 years, and nobody has ever asked me a question about them. On the 11th, somebody will ask you a question," I say. "Who? I do not know," I say. And that is honest. It might be the nominee. It might be Iris Hollis. It will not be my wife. Ivy Cobb sits down. Then she says, "The young man. Kane. Peter Kane wrote to me. I know. He asked me for the log copy, and I would not send it," she says. "I did not know him. I told him to go through the proper channel." She looks at her hands. "Then he died, and the proper channel sent me a compliment slip." "That is not on you," I say. "I know exactly whose it is," she says. "That is why I have 3 years of ring binders and no friends." Before I leave, she says, "Mr. Reyes, your wife is claiming that seat." "Yes, and you are the one who put me in the room." "I can cite an A. Yes." She looks at me with the expression of a woman who has spent a career watching people be careful about what they say in corridors. "I am not going to protect her," she says. "I know," I say. "That is why you are going." I drive home and I stop at a set of lights and sit through 2 changes of green because I cannot make myself move the car. On Sunday, Julian Roth spends 9 hours in the compound lab, and Mai Tran, who is emptying the bins on the ground floor of that building at 6 in the evening because Nadia sent her with a van, sees him at the terminal in the pharmacy office, which is not his office. She tells her father. Her father tells me on Monday, at the gate, quietly, with his hand on the roof of my car. He was putting entries in, sir, Bo says, old ones. She saw the dates on the screen. Backfilling. Of course he is. 9 days from a sitting where a forensic accountant will read that log, Julian Roth is sitting in the dark typing 4-year-old entries into a pharmacy system, which is either the most stupid thing he has ever done or the most useful thing anybody has ever done for me. Because a pharmacy system in a hospital group keeps an audit trail, and an audit trail says what was typed and when, and nothing on this earth backdates that. Not tell anybody else, I say to Bo. Not Nadia, not Mai's friend, nobody. Yes, sir, Bo, I say. On the 11th, I might need you to say what she saw. Bo Tran looks at me for a while. Then he says, my daughter is 19, sir. I know. You are asking anyway. I am asking anyway, I say, and I make myself hold his eye while I say it, because a man who cannot look at somebody while he asks, that has no business asking it. Bo says, we will see, and walks off to open the gate for somebody, and I sit in the car and feel exactly as good about myself as I deserve to feel. Wednesday is the last family dinner before the sitting. There are 9 of us. Iris at the head, Marianne, Celeste, 2 cousins in from out of town, a company secretary who is eating with the family for the first time in his life and is terrified, Julian, and me. Julian sits 3 places from Celeste, which has never happened. The conversation is about the sitting. Marianne is on about the indignity of the requisition. The company secretary explains Section 14 twice. Iris eats her fish and says nothing at all for about 40 minutes. Null ens an extat. All the tots at the die. Coffee, Bishop starts up in the orangery. He does a scream. Then he does Nadia's voice calling the cat. Then he does a phrase in a man's voice, quite clearly, twice, the way he does, with a pause in the middle for a laugh that is not there. Burn the log. Nobody moves. Bishop says it again. Burn the log. Then he goes back to doing the cat. The company secretary laughs because he does not know any better and says, extraordinary bird. Marianne says, that awful thing, and reaches for the cream. Celeste has gone absolutely white, and Iris Hollis, at the head of the table, puts down her cup and looks at nothing for about 5 seconds, and then says, pleasantly, does anybody want the last of the tart? She does not look at Julian, not once. She does not look at anybody. I sit at that table with my hands in my lap, and I understand that the most dangerous person in this house has just filed something away, and that she is going to be perfectly charming for 8 days. Julian Roth leaves at 9:40. He does not say goodbye to Celeste. Upstairs, my wife sits on the end of the bed for a long time with her shoes still on. Then she says, Nathan, yes, do you think a bird can make a sentence up? No, I say. Neither do I, she says. She goes to the window and stands there, and I watch my wife look out at a dark garden and start, at last, at the very end, to be afraid of something. What log, I say, because a stupid husband would ask. Pharmacy, she says. It has to be pharmacy. Then she says, more to the glass than to me. He has been strange for a fortnight. I say nothing. There is a rule I have made for myself, and I have kept it for 5 weeks. I never say one word against Julian Roth. Not one. Everything she is about to think, she is going to think in her own voice, and that is the only way it will stick. On Thursday morning, she asks him. I know because I am in the corridor outside the small library carrying a stack of files that I do not need, which is a trick I have got very good at, and the door is not quite shut. She says, how long does it stay findable? There is a pause about 2 seconds long. Julian says, what? A compound, she says, in a person. How long can it be found? Why are you asking me that? Because I have been in that lab, she says. Because I signed the transfer myself and I have handled it. And on Tuesday, I am sitting down in a room with a nurse and a trolley and my grandmother's ridiculous circus. And if there is any way that handling it shows, I need to know today. Another pause. Longer. Julian says, 40 days. Celeste says, from what? From ingestion, he says. Handling is nothing. Skin is nothing. you would have to drink it. I stand in that corridor with a stack of files and my ears roaring. Then Celeste says, quite lightly, well, that is a relief, and I hear her chair. And then Julian Roth says the sentence that ends him. He says, when did your headaches stop? There is a silence of a kind I have never heard in this house. Celeste says, why? And Julian says, quickly, too quickly. No reason. You said in November they went on for days, and I say what I always say. Drink water and stop working at night. She says something I do not catch. A door moves. I walk away with my files and go and stand in the boot room among 40 coats and hold on to a shelf. He is going to test her. Of course he is going to test her. He has just done the same arithmetic I did on a staircase, and he is a chemist and he has access to a machine. And by Friday night, Julian Roth is going to know that there is a band in Celeste Hollis's blood. And then he will do the second thing, which is worse. He will ask himself when. And there is only one cup in all of this that ever went anywhere it was not meant to go. And it went there in front of 240 people. And I am the man who was standing next to it. 6 days. He tests her on Friday. I know he tests her because on Friday afternoon, Celeste has a routine occupational bloods appointment at the North Clinic that appeared in her calendar on Thursday night. And because my Tran, who is now watching everything in this house like a cat at a hole, tells her father that the doctor came to the house at 8 in the evening with a case. Emmett Shaw. Of course. Shaw draws it, Julian runs it, and neither of them tells her a single thing. Because what could they possibly tell her? I spend Friday night lying awake beside my wife, doing an inventory of what Julian Roth can actually do to me before Tuesday. He cannot tell Celeste, because to explain the band, he has to explain the amber, and she knows what the amber is for, and the moment he says it out loud, she will know she drank her own husband's dose. He cannot cancel the sitting, because 11 people signed a consent form, and a Kane nominee is already inside the file. He can stop her claiming the seat. That is the clean move. If she does not claim it, she does not sit the panel, and the band fades on the 12th, and everything I have built goes out like a match. Or he can stop me. On Saturday, he tries the clean move, and it goes badly for him. He comes to the house at 11 in the morning and tells Celeste that the seat is a trap. Kane wants her in the compound file so that she personally owns 4 years of records she has never read. She should let Marianne take it. He is saying all this as her friend. I am in the next room. I do not even have to work at it. Celeste says, on Wednesday, you did not want a nurse in the room. Today, you do not want me in the seat. He says, Celeste. She says, what is in the log? Nothing is in the log. Then why did a bird in my grandmother's orangery spend Wednesday evening saying burn it in your voice, Julian? The silence goes on for a while. Then he says, low and fast, you do not know what you are walking into. And she says, then tell me, and he does not tell her, because he cannot, and that is that. He leaves. She stands in the hall for a minute, then she comes and finds me in the morning room, and sits down next to me, and puts her head on my shoulder, which she has never done, not once, in 5 weeks of marriage. I sit there with a murderer's head on my shoulder, and my heart going like a hammer, and I think, 4 days. She says, do you know what the worst thing is? No. I have known him since I was 22, she says. And I cannot think of one single thing he has ever done that was for me. I do not answer that. There is nothing I could say to that which would not be a knife, and it is not time for knives yet. On Sunday evening, he tries the other thing. My car will not start. It is a perfectly ordinary failure, and I do not think about it for 1 second, because I have never once in my life thought about a car not starting. Botran is coming on at 10. He says he will run me out to the shop and back because my father is doing a first day at the furnace with a bandaged hand, and Ren has been ringing me since 6. It is raining. We take the river road because it is 9 minutes shorter, and because I have completely forgotten that I ever said anything to anybody about the river road, and that is the sentence I am going to be carrying around for the rest of my life. There is a van at the bend by the water treatment works. It is stopped, half on the road with no lights. Bo brakes and goes wide, and the van comes off the verge into us on the passenger side, and everything is very loud and then extremely quiet. And I am sitting in the dark with rain coming in and my ears singing and my left hand not working properly. Botran is not making any noise at all. Somebody drives away. I hear it. I do not see it. I could not tell you a color or a plate. And when the police ask me later, I say so. And I watch that answer go into a notebook and become nothing. Bo has a broken collarbone, 3 ribs, and the shoulder. the bad one, the one he ruined carrying me down 3 flights of stairs in a life that no longer exists. They keep him in. I sit in that corridor at 2 in the morning with my hands strapped and my coat wet through, and I do the arithmetic. And the arithmetic says that I put a man in a car on a road because a plan needed me at a furnace at 10:30. I gets there at 3. She looks at me across a corridor, and she does not say anything at all. And that is much worse than if she had. Rosalind Kane arrives at 3:20 in the morning in a coat over pajamas. She does not ask me if I am all right. She takes my face in both hands and turns it to the light and looks at my pupils, one and then the other. And then she says, "Hospital, now. You are concussed." And I say, "I have been seen." And she says, "By whom?" And I say, "By a man with a torch," and she says a word. Then she sits down beside me on a plastic chair and takes my good hand and holds it in both of hers on her knee, and neither of us says anything for about 10 minutes. Eventually, she says, "He knows. He knows." "Since when?" "Friday," I say. "He tested her on Friday. He worked out the cup. Then he will try again," she says. "He has 2 days," I say. Rosalind Kane turns and looks at me and says, "And if he manages it, do you understand what happens?" She waits until I look at her. "There is no version of this where somebody else finishes it," she says. "Priya has a log with nothing in it. I have a 3-year-old panel from a dead man. Ivy Cobb has photographs and no standing. You are the whole thing, Nathan. You are the only person alive who knows what was in that cup. And the only reason you know is a reason you will not say out loud to anybody, including me." "I know. So do not die on Monday," she says. "I will do my best," she says. I am extremely serious, and I say, "So am I." And then she leans over and kisses me, quickly, on the mouth in a hospital corridor at 3:30 in the morning with a nurse pushing a trolley past us. Then she sits back and looks straight ahead and says, "That was badly timed." "It was very badly timed," I say. "I have been going to do that since the car park," she says, "and I did not want it to happen because you nearly died, because that is a stupid reason." "It is a stupid reason," I say. "Yes," she says. "Well," and she keeps holding my hand. At 6 in the morning, I go in to see Bo. He is gray and strapped and furious, in the way that quiet men are furious, which is politely. He says, "Sir, the van had no lights." "I know." He says, "I am sorry about the car." And I sit down beside the bed of a man who has been broken twice in 2 lifetimes on my account. And I say, "Bo, I am going to say a thing and you can throw me out afterwards. On Tuesday morning, there is a board sitting. I am going to ask Mai to stand up in front of 11 people and say what she saw on a screen on Sunday evening." Bo Tran looks at the ceiling for a while. Then he says, "My daughter told me on Monday that if you did not ask her, she was going to be very angry with you." I have to look out of the window for a moment. She said, "He asked me to tell him and I told him. And now he is being careful with me like I am a child," Bo says. 19 years old, terrible temper, her mother's. Then he says, "Sir," and I say, "Bo, my name is Nathan." And he says, "I know that, sir." I go home at 8 in the morning on Monday the 10th of December with a strapped hand and a coat that smells of rain and hospital. Celeste is in the hall. She has been up all night. She comes across that hall very fast and she takes hold of me hard enough to hurt. And she says my name twice into my shoulder and she is shaking. "Somebody ran my husband off the river road," she says. "Yes. Somebody ran my husband off the river road," she says again, and it is not a sentence, it is an engine turning over. Then she steps back and wipes her face with the back of her hand, and my wife turns into what she actually is, which is the most formidable person in this city. "Tomorrow," she says, "I am taking that seat, and then I am opening every file that man has ever touched, and I am going to do it in front of my grandmother so that nobody can make it go away afterwards." "Yes," I say. "Get some sleep," she says. "You look terrible." I go upstairs and I sit on the end of the bed in the room I died in, and I look at an $11 orchid from a supermarket, and I laugh until I have to put my hand over my mouth. She is going to walk into that room and roll her own sleeve up out of pure fury on my behalf. 24 hours. The 11th of December is gray and still and cold enough that the gravel crunches differently. The sitting is at 10 in the boardroom on the 4th floor of the Hollis building, which is a room with a table made out of 1 tree and 11 chairs, and a portrait of a man who died in April at 54. I have been looking at that portrait since I got here. "Isn't they cannot aches and He has a long face and he is holding a pair of spectacles in one hand, and whoever painted him put in every vein on the backs of his hands. Iris arrives at 20 to 10. She does not look at anybody. She sits down at the end under her husband and puts her cane against the arm of the chair. By 5:02, the seats are filled. Marianne, 2 cousins, the company secretary with 3 folders, a woman from Lisbon on a screen with the sound not working for the first 4 minutes. Celeste at the middle of the long side, with a black folder squared off in front of her. Priya Rahman sits at the far corner with a laptop and a face like a closed door. She is about 50, and she has not said one unnecessary word since she walked in. Ivy Cobb is on a chair against the wall with a plastic wallet on her knees. Julian Roth comes in at 4 minutes to 10 and takes the chemist's chair at the side, which is not a seat and has no vote, and he sits down and puts his hands flat on the table. He looks straight at me for about a second and a half. I look back with a strapped hand and an entirely empty face, and something in his jaw moves. Mai Tran is in the corridor outside with a folder Nadia gave her and no idea whether she is going to be called. In the anteroom there is a trolley, a phlebotomist called Susan, who does this every January and is reading a magazine and a rack of numbered tubes. The company secretary reads the notice. He reads the resignation of Simon Hollis. He reads section 14 and the Kane nomination, and he apologizes for reading it. Then he says, "The first business is the claim on the vacant seat by Celeste Hollis, and under the charter, the founders panel is taken at the sitting before the vote is recorded." And Julian Roth says, "May I raise something before we start?" The company secretary looks at Iris. Iris says nothing, which is permission. Julian says, "This is a procedural point, and it is a sensible one. The annual panel is on the 14th of January. That is 4 weeks and 6 days from today. We are proposing to draw blood from every seat in this room twice inside a month." He spreads his hands. It is expensive, it is redundant, and frankly, it is undignified with an outside nominee present. I would suggest the seat is confirmed today and the panel is taken with everybody else's in January. It is a good speech. It is short, it is reasonable, and it is delivered by a man who is not asking for anything for himself. Marianne says, "Immediately, I agree. This has already been a circus." One of the cousins says, "Seconded." And I sit there in a chair against the wall with my heart going, and I do not move a muscle, because it is not mine to say, and because the whole of both of my lives is now sitting on other people's mouths. The company secretary says, "Ma'am, it would need a resolution to disapply the charter." Iris Hollis says, "No, that is all she says." Marianne says, "Mother, be reasonable. It is 4 weeks." And Iris says, "It is a charter. And the entire point of a charter is that it does not care whether you are in a hurry." She looks down the table. Every seat, every year, on the day the seat is taken, read the next item. Julian Roth sits back very slowly. And then Celeste says, "And I want to be clear about something for the minute, since Dr. Roth has raised it. I am not asking for an exception on my first day in a seat. Draw mine first." She says it to the room, and she means it as a display of iron in front of 11 people. It is also, at this moment, the single most expensive sentence anyone in my family has ever spoken. The company secretary says, then the second procedural note. Under the charter, the samples must be read by a laboratory not owned or controlled by the company. He turns a page. The appointed laboratory for this year is. He stops. He looks at the page again and then at Iris. "Say it," says Iris. "Kane Diagnostics," he says. The appointment was changed by the chair emerita on the 8th of December. Nobody says anything for about 3 seconds. Marianne says, "Mother, what have you done?" "Our previous laboratory has read our blood for 19 years, Iris says, "and it is majority owned by a holding company in which this family has an interest, which I discovered on the 8th of December when I finally read the paperwork like a grown woman. That is not independent. It has not been independent since the year Celeste was born." She lifts her chin very slightly. "I wrote that clause," she says. "I intend to have it obeyed at least once before I die." Priya Raman does not look up from her laptop, and I watch her not look up, and I think, that is the most professional thing I have ever seen anybody do. Julian Roth says, "Ma'am, with respect, there is an obvious conflict in having a nominee's own company read the samples. Then it is fortunate," says Iris, "that the samples are numbered and the seal is broken in this room, and the results are read out at this table in front of you. If Kane Diagnostics lies to us today, they lie in writing. In front of a forensic accountant, they hired themselves. Sit down, Julian. He is already sitting down. That is what makes it a killing. Susan comes in with the trolley at 12 minutes past 10. I have thought about this moment perhaps 200 times since a bathroom floor in November, and in every version of it, there is something dramatic. There is nothing dramatic. 11 people take their jackets off and roll up a sleeve and make a joke about their veins. Celeste goes first. She puts her arm out on the table without looking at it and carries on reading her folder with the other hand. Susan finds the vein in about 6 seconds and says, "Sharp scratch," and Celeste says, the tube fills. It is red and completely ordinary, and it takes 11 seconds. Susan writes a number on the label, number 1. She puts it in the rack. I look at the tube in the rack and my ears are roaring so loudly that I miss the next 2 names. Then Susan does Marianne, and the cousins, and the company secretary, and the woman in Lisbon is excused because she is in Lisbon. And Iris rolls up her own sleeve without being asked and says, "The left one is better, dear. I have had 81 years of practice." And then Susan looks at her list and says, "And the observer." I put my arm on the table. Because Iris Hollis told me in a corridor in November that the charter says every seat, and because I did the arithmetic in a bathroom that night and knew this was coming, and because a man who refuses is a man with something in his blood. Sharp scratch, 11 seconds. Number 11 in the rack. Julian Roth watches my arm the entire time. The rack goes out at 25 past 10 with a cane courier and a form signed by 3 people. Priya Raman says the analyzer run is 90 minutes including transport and goes back to her laptop. 90 minutes. The company secretary says, "Then we will take the committee business while we wait." And that is when this room stops being about blood at all and becomes, for an hour and a half, the most brutal thing I have ever sat through. Priya Raman opens the compound committee item. She does not accuse anybody of anything. That is what makes it unsurvivable. She simply reads out what she has in a flat voice with page references. 22 pages of minutes across 4 years. 9 meetings recorded, of which 6 have no attendance list. 14 tolerance studies referenced in the clinic paperwork, of which 4 appear in the minutes. And she says, "And I would like to ask about the pharmacy log for the North Outpatient Clinic." Julian says, "The log is complete." "The log is complete now," says Priya Raman. She turns her laptop round. "The system keeps an audit trail," she says. "It records the user, the terminal, and the time of every entry." On the 2nd of December, between 11 minutes past 6 and 9 minutes past 11 in the evening, 41 entries were created against dates in the previous 3 years. They were made from the pharmacy office terminal on a login belonging to a pharmacy technician who was on a training course in another city that day. Silence. "There are 2 possible explanations," says Priya Raman. Either a member of staff on a train reconstructed 4 years of records from memory in 5 hours, or somebody used her login. Marianne Hollis says, "Julian." He says, "That is a reconciliation exercise. I ordered a reconciliation exercise. The records were incomplete, and I was told to have them ready for the requisition." "Told by whom?" says Celeste. La paira suaspois." He does not answer that. Priya Raman says, "Then may I ask what the 41 entries reconcile to? Because 11 of them are batch issues to the outpatient clinic, and there is no corresponding consent documentation for any of them." And Iris Hollis says, "Miss Cobb." Ivy Cobb stands up off her chair against the wall. She has been sitting there for 50 minutes with a plastic wallet on her knees, and nobody has looked at her once. "Ma'am," she says. "You are the consent person," Iris says. "Are there consents?" "There are consents," says Ivy Cobb. "There have always been consents." She opens the wallet. "What there has never been is a batch reference on the consents that matches a batch reference in the log." "Explain that to me as if I were extremely old," says Iris. "When a volunteer signs, we write the batch on the form," Ivy says, "so that if something goes wrong, you can find every person who got that material. That is the whole purpose of it. 11 of my forms carry a batch that has never existed in the pharmacy system. Until the 2nd of December, says Priya Raman. Ivy Cobb says, fakes. Ivy coughs. "I would not know about that. I only know about my forms. I photographed them in the spring 3 years ago because I had written twice by then and had no answer, and I have photographed them every time I have found another one." She puts the wallet on the table. "I have sent 9 letters, she says. This is the 10th. I was going to send it in November and somebody told me not to." She does not look at me when she says it. She is better at this than I am. Julian Roth says, This is a documentation failure, and it is being fixed. Dr. Roth, says Priya Raman, what was in the 11 batches? Tolerance study material. Of what? Compound work is confidential to the committee. You are the committee, says Priya Raman. At 11:42, the company secretary's phone buzzes on the table, and everybody in the room looks at it. He says, that is the laboratory. They are 10 minutes out. And Julian Roth, who has been sitting with his hands flat on that table for 90 minutes, watching everything he built come apart, does the last thing he has left, which is to come at me. Before we go any further, he says, and his voice has changed, there is something this board needs to know about the man sitting against that wall. Celeste says, Julian. He ignores her. Nathan Reyes married into this family 5 weeks ago, he says. Since then, he has been in every room. He produced a customs problem out of nowhere. He produced a nurse out of nowhere. He has been quietly ill for 3 weeks and refused to see a physician. And his father's business has had an incident. And on Sunday night, there was a road accident. And every single one of those things has moved this company towards this room on this day. Nobody says anything. He has their attention because it is all true. Ask him, Julian says, why he has been performing an illness in that house for 3 weeks. Ask him what he has been pouring out of a window. I go completely cold. He has been in that room. Of course he has. He has been in that room since Sunday, looking for a bottle, and he found a flower bed with a dead rosemary bush in it. Iris Hollis says, boy, stand up. I stand up. My hand is strapped and my heart is going, and there are 11 people looking at me. Celeste Hollis has turned around in her chair to look at me too, and her face is open and completely confused, and I have 4 seconds to decide how the rest of both of my lives goes. So I tell the truth, all of it that can be told. I've been pouring out the cocoa my wife brings me every night, I say. Room does not react because nobody understands the sentence yet. Since when, says Iris. Since the night of my wedding, I say. Marianne says, what on earth is he talking about? And I say, at the wedding, Dr. Roth is right that I have not been honest. I moved a cup. There were 2 glasses from my father's shop, and my wife handed me one, and I put it down and gave her the other one. Now the room reacts. Celeste Hollis says, in a voice with nothing in it, what did you say? I moved the cup, I say. I looked at the tray, and I put the glass with the bubble in the stem into your hand, and you drank it, and you smiled at me while you did it. Julian Roth is on his feet. He is shouting. He is saying the word poisoner, and he is saying it about me, and he is telling that table that a man who swaps glasses at his own wedding and then acts sick for a fortnight is the only criminal in this room. And he is not wrong about a single fact. And I stand there and let him get all the way to the end of it, because I have been waiting 5 weeks for a room where he cannot leave. Then I say to Celeste, and only to her, ask him what was in it. She does not move. Ask him, I say, why he needed to know when your headaches stopped. Ask him why he came here this morning and asked 11 people to skip the panel. Ask him what he tested you for on Friday night with Emmett Shaw in your own house at 8 in the evening, and why neither of them has told you the result. Celeste turns her head. Julian, she says. He says, do not listen to him. She says, on Friday night you took my blood. That was occupational, he says. Routine. You came to my house with Emmett and a case, she says. What did you find? And Julian Roth, who has answered every question in this room for 90 minutes, does not answer that one. The door opens at 11:54, and a cane courier comes in with a sealed envelope and a tablet for a signature, and the company secretary breaks the seal in front of everybody and reads out that the seal is intact. He puts 11 single sheets on the table. Iris says, read them. He reads them in order, numbers, and names, and it is exactly as boring as everybody has always said it is. Marianne is fine, and the cousins are fine, and Iris has cholesterol she has been ignoring for a decade, and the company secretary has an iron level his wife is going to want to know about. Number 11, he says. Observer, Reyes, Nathan. He reads out 5 lines of nothing at all, everything within range, no anomalies noted. Julian Roth makes a small sound, because that is the proof of what I did. A man who has been drinking the amber for 5 weeks cannot have blood like that, and every person in this room who understands what is happening now knows that I emptied every single cup. And then the company secretary says, number 1. He stops. He says, I am going to read exactly what is on the page. Read it, says Iris, Hollis, Celeste. All values within range with one exception. An unidentified band is present between the standard markers, narrow, reproducible on repeat injection, not corresponding to any compound in the reference library. The laboratory notes that the same anomaly appears in one historical sample held in their archive. Nobody breathes. Priya Raman says, quietly, and without looking up from her laptop, which historical sample? The company secretary turns the page over. There is a name and a date, he says. The sample is dated 3 years ago in March. The patient is Peter Kane. There is a sound in that room that I am not going to be able to describe properly. It is 11 people making no noise at all. Celeste Hollis is looking at the piece of paper in front of the company secretary, which she cannot possibly read from where she is sitting. Then she starts doing arithmetic. I can see her do it. I have watched this woman take a man apart with numbers in 6 minutes, and I know exactly what her face looks like when it is counting. She says, 40 days. Nobody answers her. She says, he told me 40 days from ingestion. She turns her head and looks at Julian Roth and says, what did you find on Friday? And he says nothing. And then Celeste Hollis says the date out loud. She says, the 3rd of November. She looks at me. You swapped the cups, she says. Yes, I say. At our wedding. At our wedding, I say. And Celeste Hollis, who is the most intelligent person in this room and who has never in her life needed anything explained twice, sits in a chair in front of her grandmother and her mother and a forensic accountant. And she works out, in public, in about 4 seconds, that the thing in her own blood is the thing she poured with her own hand, and that it has been sitting in her for 5.5 weeks with her name and the date on it. She puts one hand flat on the table. Iris Hollis says, granddaughter. Celeste does not answer. Iris says, look at me. Celeste looks up, and Iris Hollis says in the mildest voice in the world, why does your husband know what it tastes like? I stand in that room with 11 people looking at me, and I decide, in about a second, that I am going to give Iris Hollis the same answer I gave Simon and Rosalind, because it is the only one I have, and because she has earned the shape of it, if not the contents. On the 3rd of November, I say, before the toast, I already knew what was in that glass. How? Says Iris. I am not going to tell you, ma'am. Marianne Hollis makes a noise of pure outrage. The company secretary looks at his folder. Priya Raman writes something down. Iris Hollis sits under a portrait of her dead husband and looks at me for a long moment, and then she says, 40 years I have wanted somebody in this family to refuse to answer me for a good reason. Sit down. The rest of that morning is procedure, and it is the most beautiful procedure I have ever heard. The claim on the seat is not put to a vote, because Celeste withdraws it in one sentence, without being asked. The nomination stands. Priya Raman is confirmed to the vacant seat for the remainder of the term with the compound committee attached, and she says thank you and immediately asks for the batch reconciliation to be produced by Friday. Julian Roth is suspended from all duties and his access is revoked while he is sitting in the room. The company secretary is instructed to deliver the pharmacy audit trail, the 11 consent forms, and both laboratory results to the police and to the medicines regulator before the end of the day. He does not shout. That is the thing I did not expect. He sits there while it happens and he goes gray and small. And at the end he says, I want it on the record that I have not been given an opportunity to explain the chemistry. And Priyaraman says, without looking up, you will be given a great many opportunities. And one of the cousins laughs out loud and then puts a hand over his mouth. Ivy Cobb is asked to remain. Iris asks the company secretary to read all 9 of her letters into the minutes in full, with dates. And when he objects that it will take 40 minutes, Iris says, then it will take 40 minutes. It takes 51. Nobody leaves. At the end of it, Ivy Cobb is sitting very straight with her hands folded and her eyes wet and absolutely furious about her eyes being wet. At 2:30, the police take the samples and the paperwork. At 3, they take a statement from Ivy. At 3:20, Mai Tran comes in from the corridor, where she has been sitting for 5 hours with a folder she never needed, and describes a screen she saw on a Sunday evening, and gets asked her name 3 times. At 4 o'clock, Emmett Shaw is telephoned and asked to attend, and he arrives at 5:10, and he is in that room for 11 minutes before he says the words, I want to make a statement, and asks for a lawyer. He gives them everything by Thursday. Every certificate he ever signed for a Hollis, going back 9 years, including one in the spring of the year Peter Kane died. There is not one in the spring for me, because in this life there is no spring for me. and I have to go and stand in a stairwell for a while when I think about that. Celeste is taken by her grandmother into the small office next door at 20 past 12, and they are in there for an hour and a half. I do not know what is said. Nobody ever tells me. When the door opens, Iris comes out first and goes straight to a chair and sits down and looks about 100 years old for a moment, and then she straightens up and asks for tea. Celeste comes out afterwards, and she is composed and dry-eyed, and she walks the length of that boardroom and stops in front of me. She says, "Am I going to die?" "No," I say. "You know that. One dose is a headache and a bad night," I say. "It takes 7. You had one 5.5 weeks ago, on the 3rd of November at 9 minutes past 10. You are going to be fine, and you are going to be extremely tired for about a month, and there will be a stripe on your blood work until Thursday, and then there will not be." She takes that in. Then she says, "How long did you know?" And I say, "Long enough that I could have done it differently, and I did not." Celeste Hollis nods slowly. "You could have told me at the table in the winter garden," she says. "Before I lifted it, I would have put it down." "Yes," I say. "And by Christmas, I would have been a man who made a hysterical accusation at his own wedding, and my father would have lost his shop in March. Peter Kane would still be a young man with an undiagnosed condition, and you and I would be sitting in this building in 10 years, being polite to each other." She looks at me for a long time. Then she says, "You are the coldest person I have ever met." And I say, "I learned it recently." And she says, "From whom?" And I do not answer that either. At the door, she stops and says one more thing without turning round. "I would have gone through with it," she says. "All 7. I want you to know that I know that about myself now, because everybody in this building is going to spend a year telling me I was led into it." And then she goes, "I am not going to pretend that fixed anything." There is a version of this where she weeps and I forgive her, and we understand each other, and it would be a much nicer afternoon, and it would be a lie. What actually happens is that my wife walks out of a boardroom, and I stand there and feel absolutely nothing at all for about 4 minutes. And then I go into a stairwell and I'm extremely sick. Rosalind is downstairs in the lobby. She has been in that lobby since 10 past 10 in the morning because she is not permitted to be anywhere near that room, and she would not go home. She stands up when the lift doors open and she looks at my face and says, "Well, Peter Kane," I say. They read his name out in the room. Rosalind Kane puts both hands over her mouth and stands in the middle of the lobby of the Hollis building and does not make a single sound, and I go and put my arms around her, and she holds on to the back of my coat with both fists. Afterwards, she says into my shoulder, 3 years, I know. 3 years, and everybody was so kind about it. I know. Then she steps back and wipes her face and says, "Right," and takes out her phone and starts working, because that is what she does, and I stand there and love her so much that I have to look at the floor. The next 4 days are noise. The regulator suspends the compound lab on Wednesday. Julian Roth is arrested on Thursday morning at his mother's house in the country, which is a detail the newspapers enjoy enormously. Emmett Shaw is arrested on Thursday afternoon, and according to Priya Raman, is the most talkative man she has ever encountered. The band in Celeste's blood is confirmed on a second draw on the 12th of December, which is day 40, with 1 day to spare, and on the 14th it is a whisper, and by Christmas there is nothing there at all. Spun A-N-A. 1 day. That is what the whole of it came down to. I have thought about that 1 day more often than I have thought about almost anything else. On the Friday, 2 officers come to the house with a search warrant, and I take them out to the flower bed under the 3rd floor window and show them a dead rosemary bush. They take soil samples for 2 hours in the rain. Then, I take them to the potting shed and show them a blue pot with a monstrous white orchid in it that has 14 flowers and roots coming over the rim like something arriving, and I explain that it received 3 weeks of it before I moved it. Nadia stands in the doorway of that potting shed and watches 2 men in overalls carry away the best plant she has ever grown in her life, and she says, to nobody, "That is my orchid." The senior officer says, "Ma'am, this is evidence in a criminal investigation." Nadia says, "I have been feeding that thing since November." "You have," I say. She turns and looks at me with her hands on her hips. "What was in it?" she says. I tell her. Nadia Petrov stands in a potting shed in the rain and says a sentence in another language that Anselm later refuses to translate for me. And then she says, "Well, no wonder," and goes back into the house, and I have to sit down on an upturned crate for a minute. The lab report on the soil comes back in January. 3 weeks of the amber course, in a pot, with a date range and a plant that grew like a monster on it. It is the single most quoted piece of evidence in the whole case, and there is a photograph of that orchid in 3 newspapers. Nadia has the photograph framed. She still calls it her orchid. She is entirely correct. They never do find out who was driving the van on the river road. They find the van burnt out on the 2nd of January in a yard 4 miles from the water treatment works. And that is the end of that. And it stays the end of that. I have made my peace with it, mostly. I would like to know who was driving. I am never going to, and I carry that the same as everything else. Bo Tran comes out of hospital on the 20th of December with his arms strapped across his chest and a great deal of opinion about hospital food. They do not dismiss him. On the 16th of December, Iris Hollis has him driven to her house, sits him in the orangery with a cup of tea and a bird screaming in the background, and asks him what he thinks the night porter's job at that house is actually worth. He tells her. She doubles it and makes him head of house security, which does not exist until the moment she says it, and then she asks about his daughter. Mai Tran starts a training contract with Priya Raman's firm in February. She is 19 and she is going to be terrifying by 30. Ivy Cobb is appointed Director of Clinical Governance for the whole hospital arm in January, reporting to the board and not to any lab. Her first act is to write to every volunteer in 11 batches, personally, and it takes her until March, and 4 of those letters go to families rather than to people. She keeps the ring binders. She has told me she will keep them until she dies. The lease on my father's shop expires in 3 years. In the 2nd week of January, the company writes to him, offering to sell him the freehold at a valuation, with the improvements from December included. And my father telephones me in an absolute panic because he cannot work out what the catch is. There is no catch. I asked for it. It was the only thing I asked for in the entire business, and I asked Iris directly, in the orangery, with the rain coming through the roof, in the place she had told me not to sit. She said, "Is that all?" And I said, "That is all." And she said, "You are a very cheap man to buy." And I said, "I am not being bought, ma'am. I am being paid." And she looked at me for a while, and then she laughed properly for the first time since November. My father cannot afford the valuation. He is going to spend 4 years telling everybody he cannot afford the valuation. He signs the papers in February with his bad hand, slowly, and the surgeon was right. He did get most of it back. Most. He works the furnace again by March. He cannot do the fine stem work anymore, and he has taught Ren to do it instead, and she is better at it than he was at her age, which he mentions to strangers. Ren gets into the science program. Iris reads her application herself, exactly as promised, and then telephones somebody and is extremely rude to them. She tells Ren afterwards, on the telephone, that the application was competent and the personal statement was awful, and that she should stop trying to sound like a brochure. Ren says, "What should I sound like?" Iris says, "Like the child who told a table full of fools that glass is a liquid that has forgotten how to move." My sister is 16 years old, and she does not cry about things. She got off that telephone call and went out to the yard and stood there for a while, and I did not follow her. Marianne Hollis resigns from the board on the 9th of January. She does it before anybody asks her to, which surprises everybody except Iris. On the day she does it, she comes and finds me in the hall and says my name, which is the 2nd time in her life. "Nathan," she says. "There is a contact sheet from your wedding, I know," I say. She takes an envelope out of her bag. "Frame 14, she says. "I saw it in the proofs in November, and I had it pulled, and I told the photographer it was a bad photograph of my sister-in-law. Ivy Scansoro Avi same. Why are you giving it to me? Because you already knew," she says, "and I have been trying for a month to work out how, and I have decided that I do not want to know." Then she says, "I have known about the 2 of them since Celeste was 26, and I said nothing, because I thought it would burn out, and because I did not want a scene." She looks at the envelope in my hand. "I did not want a scene," she says again. And then she leaves, and that is the last conversation I ever have with Marianne Hollis. I look at frame 14 once, and then I put it in a drawer, and I have never looked at it since. Julian Roth's hand on the back of a chair. It is not evidence of anything, and it never was. Simon Hollis calls me from Denver on the 2nd of January to complain about the snow. Kane Diagnostics signed his group in the last week of December on the merits, after Rosalind's people spent 4 days deciding they were good. He tells me this at some length, in the manner of a man who wants to be certain I understand that he earned it. "I earned that," he says. "You did. I want you to know I earned that." "Simon," I say, You were the only person in that family who said yes to me, and you did it in a week, and I have not forgotten it." There is a pause, and then he says gruffly, "Well," and asks after my father's hand. He comes back in the spring. He is chair by the following year, and he is a good one, and he still has that coffee machine he bought himself, and he brings it with him to a building with 9 kitchens. Trial only comes in the autumn. That is how these things go. And nobody warns you that the waiting rooms are the hardest of it. Julian Roth pleads not guilty to everything and then changes his mind about half of it in the summer. The batch log, the audit trail, the consent forms, Emmett Shaw's 9 years of certificates, the soil from a flower bed and a plant pot, and a stripe on 2 blood panels 3 years apart. Celeste is charged in March. She does not contest a single fact. The case that matters to Rosalind is the one about her brother, and it is slower and harder, and it is still not finished when the year turns. Peter Kane's samples were destroyed in the ordinary way, and the archive slide is a fragment, and the amber course was built by a clever man to leave nothing behind. But Emmett Shaw signed that certificate, and Emmett Shaw is talking, and in October, a woman in a courtroom hears the sentence, "Her brother did not have an undiagnosed condition," said out loud by a person in a wig. Rosalind holds my hand through all of it, and afterwards, she goes out into a corridor and stands by a window, and I let her stand there. And then it is spring, and there is a Tuesday coming that I have been walking towards since the 3rd of November. I know the date. I have known it since the 3rd of November. It is the 9th of April, and I have never once written it down anywhere, because writing a thing down makes it real, and because for 5 months it was the only page of my map I refused to look at. On the 8th of April, I do not sleep at all. On the 9th, I get up at 6 in a flat above a dry cleaner 2 streets from my father's shop, which is where I have been living since December, and I stand at the window and watch a man open the shutters on a bakery. Nothing happens all morning. I go to the shop. My father is kneeling and shouting about the kiln. Ren is doing stems. Anselm turns up at 11 with a box of food he has made for no reason at all, because he has taken to doing that since somebody finally asked him about food, and the 3 of them stand around a bench eating and arguing. At 2 o'clock I go outside because I cannot sit still, and I walk down to the river, and I stand on the bridge for about an hour. Nothing happens. At 4 o'clock the light goes yellow and long, and I'm still standing on that bridge, and I am still here. I did not know it would feel like that. I thought it would be relief. It is like carrying something heavy with both arms for months and then setting it down. Your arms stay up where they were. They do not believe it yet. Map is finished. From tomorrow morning, I do not know one single thing that has not happened yet, the same as everybody, and I stand on a bridge over gray water and understand that this is the first ordinary day of my life. Rosalind finds me there at 5:30. Because I told her the date in February, and she has said nothing about it for 2 months and has clearly been counting. She comes and stands next to me and puts her elbows on the rail and looks at the water. "Well," she says. "Well," I say. "Is that it?" "That is it." She says, "What do you want to do?" And I think about it properly, because it is the first question in 5 months to which I have no prepared answer. I want to eat something enormous, I say. Rosalind Kane laughs out loud on a bridge and takes my arm, and we walk into town in the yellow light, and behind us, the day just goes on being a day. I go back to the house exactly twice after that. The first time is in June, to give evidence, and I am in the drive for 9 minutes. The second is in August, because Iris Hollis asks me to lunch, and you do not refuse. She is 82 and she is smaller. We eat in the orangery, which is where she eats everything now. Bishop is on his stand by the lemon trees, and he is silent for about half an hour, which for him is a statement. She has the 12 cups on the table. My father remade them in the spring and delivered them in June and would not take a penny more than the original price, and she was so annoyed about that she wrote to him. We drink out of them. Amber glass with a fat twist in the stem. Halfway through lunch, she says, "Do you still have the other one?" "I do," I say. I keep it in a drawer in the flat above the dry cleaner, wrapped in a cloth. The one with the bubble in the stem, the good luck fault my sister told him to leave in. "Why?" says Iris. "Because I want to be able to look at it," I say, "and be sure I am the man who moved it, and not the man who poured it." Iris Hollis considers this for a while over a glass of water. Then she says, "My husband was killed by his brother in April, 43 years ago, and I have known it every single day since, and I have never been able to say it in a room where anybody had to listen." She sets the glass down. "Now I have. There is nothing to say to that. I put my hand on the table and she puts hers on top of it, which is a completely astonishing thing for that woman to do. Then she says, "Granddaughter goes in November," and I say, "I know," and she says, "Will you be there?" And I say, "No, ma'am," and she says, "Good." At the door she says, "Boy, one more thing." "Ma'am, I still do not know how you knew." "No, ma'am, and I am never going to know." "No, ma'am." Iris Hollis looks at me with those eyes that have been reading people since before my father was born, and she says, "It does not matter. Whatever it was, you spent all of it on other people's debts, and you kept a glass in a drawer to keep yourself honest." Then she taps the cane twice on the tile, which is how that woman says goodbye, and I go out through the winter garden where 240 people once stood with their glasses up. Behind me, in the orangery, a 40-year-old macaw who belonged to a dead man clears his throat and says, in a voice that is very nearly mine, "6 left." I stop in the doorway. I have no memory whatsoever of saying that out loud in this house. Not one. I have gone over it about 900 times since, and I still cannot place it, and Iris never mentions it, and Bishop never says it again. Some things you get to keep.
So that is the story of a clerk who kept his own copies. He did not get his life back by shouting at the people who took it. He got it back by remembering one number and paying $180 at a public counter. Watch what he does with the family rules along the way. The same right that made the girl who humiliated him pour his tea is the right that put his name in the book. Because rules are only ever as good as who is holding the pen. And notice the people he pays back at the end. A driver, a surveyor, a woman who was frightened once and told the truth late. Those are the people who actually save you, and almost nobody bothers to write their names down anywhere.